Chapter 1, Silencing, the Scandal Exposed, Cousin. Cousin. Brother, please don't do this. If someone finds us, we'll both be killed. Violet Carter stifled her desire, bashfully refusing. Don't worry, this place is so secluded, no one will come. Come on, it's hard for me to come here, I miss you so much. Cousin. As she spoke, the woman moaned, don't kiss there. Don't do that, then, like this. Richard Carter's voice was unusually hoarse. Violet Carter gritted her teeth and moaned, she could only hug the man in front of her tightly. Just as the two were immersed in lust, a faint snap came from outside the artificial mountain. The two who were in the act immediately froze, looked at each other, and quickly adjusted their clothes. After Richard Carter stealthily walked to the entrance of the cave and carefully observed the surroundings, he didn't see anyone. Just as he was about to turn around, a flash of light caught his attention. Cousin, what was that sound just now? Could it be that we were discovered? Violet Carter lowered her voice, looking around in a panic. Richard Carter turned his head to look at her, his face unpleasant, with a hint of unease. You should know who this belongs to, right? A golden lock. Violet Carter instinctively frowned, her face immediately turning pale. When she saw the words, "Long life and 100 years," on the golden lock, she clearly breathed a sigh of relief. Immediately after, a cold smile gradually appeared on the corner of her mouth. Cousin, don't worry, I won't let her talk nonsense. Not long after, Violet Carter carefully entered Pure Heart Pavilion. Pure Heart Pavilion was the residence of a foolish young miss. Originally, there were few servants, and now it was the hottest time of the day, so naturally they were all slacking off. She didn't encounter any obstacles at all. Walking all the way up to the attic, Violet Carter didn't see a single servant. You deserve to die. Violet Carter thought to herself, then carefully approached the well in the courtyard. Just as she was about to take out the powder, Lillian Lee, holding clothes, hurriedly came out of the bedroom and bumped into Violet Carter. She was startled and hurriedly saluted, "Second young madam." Violet Carter's hand froze, quietly hiding the things, and looked at her, asking, "Lillian Lee, where is Vanessa?" Lillian Lee lowered her head and replied softly, "Fifth Miss just came back from outside, covered in mud, and is currently bathing." Is that so? Violet Carter raised an eyebrow, then thought for a moment and said, "Old madam asked the people from the trade guild to bring a batch of new fabrics and asked you to take fifth sister to choose. But, miss, if fifth sister is not available, then you go in her place. If you go late, there won't be any left." Violet Carter urged, "Go quickly and come back quickly, I'll ask other servants to attend to fifth sister." Lillian Lee didn't think much about it and nodded in agreement, "Yes, then I'll trouble second young madam. I'll go right away." Violet Carter waited for Lillian Lee to leave, then went into the attic alone and, as expected, heard the sound of water. She didn't hesitate any longer, took out the fire starter, and quickly lit the fire in several flammable corners. By the time she left Pure Heart Pavilion, the fire was already raging. The weather was dry, and the attic was made of wood, so the fire quickly spread. Not long after, she heard a terrified scream coming from the courtyard. Then, cries of "fire" and "help" rang out continuously, and quickly, black smoke enveloped the Taylor estate. Violet Carter quietly stopped at a nearby pavilion, turned to look at the burning building, and sneered, "Vanessa, rest in peace. You were a fool anyway, a burden alive, better to be reincarnated sooner." She waited until the fire raged uncontrollably before feigning panic and running towards Pure Heart Pavilion. The courtyard, moments ago tranquil, was now teeming with servants, all desperately trying to extinguish the flames. Violet Carter shouted towards the servants, her voice filled with feigned anxiety, "Hurry. Fifth Miss is still inside. If anything happens to her, none of you will live." ###Chapter 2, Fifth Miss burns to death. Hearing her scream, the servants fought the fire even more frantically. When the flame subsided somewhat, a servant bravely rushed into the inferno to search for 5th Mississippi. Violet Carter anxiously watched the doorway, wondering if Vanessa had perished. Just then, a servant ran out, pale and trembling, and stammered to Violet Carter, "Say. Second young madam, terrible news." Violet Carter's heart leaped with joy, but she maintained a facade of concern. "What is it? Tell me quickly." "Fie. 5th Miss. 5th Miss is dead. Burned to death," the servant choked out. "We were too late. She was charred beyond recognition." If she hadn't struggled to control herself, Violet Carter would have laughed aloud. As expected, moments later, she saw servants carrying a small, shrouded figure swiftly away. "You're lying. 5th sister couldn't have met such a terrible end." Violet Carter cried out, her face a mask of grief and disbelief. "Second young madam, it truly is 5th Mississippi. The nanny has confirmed it." Feigning weakness, Violet Carter stumbled and said faintly, "Quickly, inform master and madam." She then slowly approached the shrouded figure, gritted her teeth, and lifted the cover. The body beneath was burned beyond recognition, the air thick with the stench of charred flesh. Fighting back nausea, Violet Carter replaced the cover. Even with that brief glimpse, she was certain it was Vanessa. The golden bracelet, still clasped around the charred wrist, was clearly visible. "Vanessa Taylor, you truly didn't disappoint me." Violet Carter sneered inwardly. "What's happened?" Mrs. Taylor arrived hurriedly with a retinue, her voice laced with worry. Violet Carter feigned grief and turned, "Mother, 5th sister, she." Before she could finish, Violet Carter suddenly screamed hysterically, "Ghost! Ghost! Ghost!" Her face, drained of blood, was contorted with terror. Forgetting all decorum, she trembled, pointing at Vanessa, who stood beside Mrs. Taylor, before collapsing to the ground, ashen-faced. Mrs. Taylor frowned, her voice laced with displeasure. "What's with this commotion? Why are you making such a fuss?" As if struck by karma, Violet Carter, staring at the unharmed Vanessa, trembled and pointed at the distant covered figure, her voice hollow. "Fifth sister, wasn't she burned to death?" As she spoke, Violet Carter shuddered uncontrollably, her face whiter than a ghost. "What nonsense are you talking about? 5th Miss is perfectly fine." "Burned to death where?" Mrs. Taylor frowned at Violet Carter's demeanor, her voice sharp with annoyance. Vanessa Taylor shot Violet Carter a sidelong glance, a sneer playing on her lips. Her clear eyes held a look of innocent naivete as she stepped towards Violet Carter and said sweetly, "So you're my second sister-in-law." Violet Carter recoiled as Vanessa approached. Hearing her speak so casually, her face paled further. "Get away. Get away from me." Vanessa Taylor reached out to help Violet up, but she remained motionless. "Violet, you're still not up." Mrs. Taylor's face darkened. 5th Miss fell while bathing and is now conscious. Thankfully, she managed to escape on her own. Otherwise, with the servants' negligence, we could have had another fire incident. Helped up by her maid, Violet Carter stared at Vanessa in disbelief, finding the entire situation utterly bizarre. After a long moment, she finally regained her senses, pointing a trembling finger at the shrouded figure. "That person isn't 5th Miss, then who is it?" Mrs. Taylor glanced over and then instructed Mama Zhang beside her, "Go and see." Nanny Zhang nodded and immediately approached. Violet Carter's gaze remained fixed on Vanessa, who stood innocently beside Mrs. Taylor, her expression guileless. Chapter 3, What? How could this be? Mama Zhang examined the body carefully, then shot a strange look at Violet Carter before hurrying back to Mrs. Taylor's side. Her voice was strained. "If this old servant is not mistaken, that person appears to be Miss Evelyn Taylor." "What? How could this be?" Violet Carter shrieked, her voice piercing. Mrs. Taylor's heart ached. She turned to the others and said, "Everyone, go take a look. Examine carefully." Before the servants could move, Violet Carter rushed forward, no longer deterred by the stench of burnt flesh. She frantically threw herself at the body, turning it over in a frenzy. When she finally saw the birthmark on the child's inner thigh, her vision went black, and she fainted. "Quickly, help second young madam up. Someone fetch a physician." Mrs. Taylor stared at the horrific sight on the mat, her face ashen. Her steps faltered, and her eyes reddened with tears. "Mother, mother, please don't be like this. The dead cannot be brought back. You must take care of yourself." Vanessa supported Mrs. Taylor, offering gentle comfort. Violet, now regaining consciousness, heard Vanessa's words and pointed at her accusingly, "It's all your fault. It's all your fault. You killed my daughter. Give me back Evelyn. Vanessa, you devil. You deliberately lured her here to burn her to death. I know you did." Nanny Zhang nodded and immediately approached. "All right." Mrs. Taylor snapped, her voice low and sharp. "Vanessa, pull yourself together. How could Vanessa possibly have harmed Dong Wai? Don't talk nonsense, this was an accident. All of you, help the second young madam back to her room and watch her closely. Don't let her cause any trouble. And someone inform the housekeeper to prepare for the young Mrs. funeral." As she was dragged away, Violet Carter shrieked relentlessly, "Vanessa Taylor, this isn't over. I will kill you. I will kill you to avenge my daughter. Vanessa Taylor." Once Violet Carter was gone, Mrs. Taylor sighed deeply. "I thought the fifth girl was finally better, that our family could finally have some peace. Who would have thought?" Vanessa clutched Mrs. Taylor's hand, tears welling in her eyes. "Mother," she sobbed, "I truly didn't kill Dong Wai. I don't know why she was in my room, and I don't know how the fire started." A flicker of fear crossed her face. "I had just finished bathing," she continued, "and when I stepped out of the tub, I slipped and fell. The next thing I knew, I was awake and there was a fire." With a look of terror, Vanessa added, "If I hadn't gotten out, I would have burned to death." Mrs. Taylor gently stroked Vanessa's face, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "You've wasted so many years pretending to be simple, it seems the heavens have finally taken pity on you. But poor Dong Wai, so young to be lost. Mother. I'll arrange for you to move to another courtyard and have a physician examine you. The wound on the back of your head isn't insignificant. And don't take your second sister-in-law's words to heart." Mrs. Taylor held Vanessa's hand, a complex mix of joy and worry swirling within her. Vanessa nodded. Mrs. Taylor gave Mama Zhang a few instructions, then had her and Lillian Li escort Vanessa to her new quarters. Supported by the other mamas, Mrs. Taylor made her way to the study, her mind heavy with the task of explaining this tragedy to her husband. Soon, they arrived at the new courtyard, the one Vanessa still habitually referred to as Pure Heart Pavilion. Lillian Li carefully helped Vanessa into a chair and arranged for the physician to examine her wound. Only after the physician declared the injury not too serious did she finally relax. Mama Zhang, well aware that Vanessa was no longer the foolish young miss she once was, wasted no time in fetching the prescribed medicine after the physician left. She brewed it herself, offering no unnecessary words. Distressed by Vanessa's injury, Lillian Li's eyes were filled with pain and self-reproach. "Miss, I'm so sorry," she said. "I wasn't by your side. It's my fault you were hurt." Chapter 4, Nightmare, Wounds of the Heart. Gazing into the mirror, Vanessa spoke calmly, "Lillian Li, this wasn't your fault." In truth, she had known from the moment Violet Carter arrived at her courtyard. She knew it was because of that time she had witnessed their illicit affair. When the fire started, she knew with absolute certainty that Violet Carter wanted her dead. But she hadn't panicked. After Violet Carter left, she had escaped the flames. Earlier, Vanessa had deliberately hit her head against a pillar, leaving a noticeable red mark. This further solidified Mrs. Taylor's belief in her story. But from this day forward, she could no longer feign ignorance and live a carefree life. She hadn't wanted to cause trouble, and certainly hadn't wanted to be on the receiving end of any harm. But the fire, and the death of Violet Carter's daughter, was an unforeseen consequence. It made a certain kind of sense. The little brat had a habit of sneaking into Pure Heart Pavilion every few days, rummaging through Vanessa's belongings and taking whatever caught her fancy. Today, it surely took advantage of the quiet midday to sneak into her room searching for something, unexpectedly getting burned to death by its own mother who set the fire. Vanessa sat quietly before the bronze mirror, gazing at her youthful, slightly gaunt face, her eyes calm, her demeanor seemingly unchanged from the foolish Vanessa of before. But Lillian Lee knew that the young mistress before her was no longer the same person. From winter to summer, 6 months had passed, and everything within Vanessa had become overly familiar. Upon waking up in the fool's body, she merely paused for a few seconds before accepting the reality of her rebirth in the unfamiliar kingdom of Tianqi. It was rather comical. Lily Taylor, a 22-year-old student of traditional medicine, had become the daughter of Grand Tutor Taylor Jiu Luong of Tianqi, a mere 14 years old, with 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters. Her birth mother had passed away early, and for over a decade, Mrs. Taylor, out of deep sisterly affection, had cared for the foolish Vanessa as her own. Vanessa Taylor. Lily Taylor whispered the name to herself, and only today, with a touch of irony, did she muse that perhaps there was a reason why fate had brought her here. Lillian Lee, who had been attending to her, intended for Vanessa to rest for a while, but she refused, so Lillian Lee continued to stand by her side. A moment later, medicine was brought to Vanessa. When it had cooled slightly, she drank it all in one gulp, without a single complaint. As dusk settled, Vanessa leaned against the window, staring into the boundless night. Her body was utterly exhausted, yet she showed no intention of rising. After an unknown amount of time, she drifted off to sleep in the chair. Amidst a winter night of thunder, torrential rain, and howling wind, a girl huddled in the downpour, her voice hoarse from weeping, stood before a tightly shut door, helplessly pounding on it. Then, the door opened, and several bags were tossed out, followed by a girl in black, her expression cold, appearing at the doorway. She ruthlessly shoved the girl standing in the rain back a few steps, pointed into the pitch-black night, and declared resentfully, "Lily Taylor, I hate you. I hate you. Get out. I don't want to see you again. From now on, this is no longer your home. Get out now." A loud bang jolted Vanessa awake. Lillian Lee, startled, dropped what she was holding. The window, struck from the outside, burst inward. Lillian Lee looked at Vanessa and hastily apologized, "Miss, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I truly didn't mean to. Are you frightened, miss? Next time, I definitely won't do that again." Vanessa seemed not to hear her words, staring blankly ahead. A chilling coldness spread through her weary body, an endless sorrow, regret, and lingering hatred consuming her entirely. For half a year, she had dreamt this dream almost every night, which was why she stubbornly forced herself to stay awake, but the woman in the dream continued to haunt her. Vanessa stared blankly at her hand, held by Lillian Lee, her mind reeling. Years ago, she had used this very hand to slap a girl hard across the face, gritting her teeth as she declared, "Nina Thompson, we are now through." Chapter 5, Hate, etched deeply. Vanessa's hands clenched and unclenched, unclenched and clenched again. Lillian Lee stammered, Miss, what's wrong?" Actually, second young madam was just upset and spoke harshly, "Don't take it to heart. Besides, your illness is cured, shouldn't you be happy?" Thinking of Violet Carter, Vanessa suddenly laughed. Why should she care about Violet's words, or Evelyn Taylor's death? They brought it upon themselves. Evelyn Taylor always caused trouble for her, now that she's dead, isn't it a clean slate? Why should others be allowed to hurt her, and why should she feel guilty? Except for Nina Thompson and Nathan Brock, except for the hatred towards them, her being was already empty, devoid of guilt. Lost in thought, Mrs. Taylor arrived with visitors to see her. Mrs. Taylor had anxiously awaited Vanessa's recovery, and should have been overjoyed, but Evelyn Taylor's incident cast a shadow over her joy. Besides inquiring solicitously about Vanessa's health, she instructed the servants to take even better care of her. As they spoke, a faint fragrance drifted in on the breeze. Vanessa instantly recognized the familiar scent, a flicker of surprise crossing her usually indifferent face. Her small frame tensed, her pale face becoming even whiter, her bitten lips starkly red. "Livia's here." Mrs. Taylor called warmly, "Livia, come quickly and see your younger sister." Vanessa's mind reeled, her gaze fixed on the doorway, heart pounding. When she saw a face completely different from her memories, her heart sank back into her chest. Her strength seemed to drain away, leaving only a thick, suffocating hatred, impossible to vent or dispel. Vanessa gave a bitter, involuntary laugh. This was a fictional dynasty, how could that person appear here? In a blink, a graceful young woman in purple approached the bed, her bright smile illuminating the room. She was indeed beautiful, perhaps even devastatingly so, especially her sparkling, captivating eyes. Yet, Vanessa couldn't bring herself to care. "Vanessa, you're truly recovered, that's wonderful." Livia's voice was gentle and sweet, intoxicating, but Vanessa detected something strange in its depths. Mrs. Taylor took Livia's hand, smiling at Vanessa. "This is your third elder sister, Livia. She just returned from praying for blessings. You haven't seen each other much, so you might be a little unfamiliar." Mrs. Taylor didn't notice the apprehension and worry in Livia's smile, which didn't quite reach her eyes. Livia glanced at Vanessa, seemingly casually asking, "I just heard the servants say that after you woke up, you don't remember anything from before. Did the physician say anything?" Hearing this, Vanessa couldn't help but look up at Livia, but it wasn't Livia's probing that caught her attention, but the scent that continued to haunt her. Indeed, as long as she lived, she would never forget that person, and the hatred she felt would likely follow her to the grave. Seeing Vanessa's silence, Mrs. Taylor said, "It's all right if you don't remember the past. Just live well from now on." Hearing Mrs. Taylor's words, Livia breathed a sigh of relief, her smile brightening. After a brief chat, Mrs. Taylor personally introduced Vanessa to the others. Royal Tudor Taylor, around 50 years old, with a slender build, streaks of silver in his hair, still retained a handsome air. Especially his unfathomable eyes, making it hard to guess his thoughts. Hearing that his daughter, in a daze for over a decade, had recovered, his expression remained unchanged, seemingly indifferent. Evelyn Taylor's death seemed to have no impact on him. After exchanging a few words, he retreated to his study. Second young Master Ronan Taylor, having just lost his beloved daughter, clearly looked unwell, but upon seeing Vanessa, he sincerely said, "It's truly wonderful that my sister has recovered." Chapter 6, I must make her life a living hell. Wu Die, in low spirits, did not appear. The eldest daughter of the Taylor family, Yara Taylor, married General Jin Yuan 2 years ago and lived year-round in the border regions, rarely returning home. Then there were Ronan Taylor and Livia Taylor. Nicholas Taylor, the fourth son, was absent. Listening to the servants' gossip, Vanessa guessed this man spent his days in brothels, a smooth talker, a womanizer with no real prospects. Besides Vanessa, Mrs. Taylor had given birth to the other 4 children. Just looking at Ronan Taylor and Livia now, it was clear the other 2 were also formidable. But Vanessa wasn't interested. For her, everything belonging to this family was merely part of her disguise. Afterward, under the guise of visiting her, many came to see Vanessa. The constant stream of visitors gave her a headache, so she told Mrs. Taylor she didn't want to see anyone until her injuries healed. Mrs. Taylor, wanting the best for her, readily agreed. Thus, except for Lillian Lee, who stayed by her side daily, no one else entered the attic. After 2 days together, Lillian Lee no longer feared Vanessa as before. Though quiet and reserved, Vanessa was kind-hearted and never scolded her for anything. However, she couldn't quite grasp her young mistress's thoughts, unsure of her next move. Today was Evelyn Taylor's burial. She was just a child, and old Master Taylor had ordered a quiet ceremony. Therefore, everything was kept simple. The funeral arrangements were modest. After the service, the Taylor mansion remained unchanged, as if nothing had happened. Violet Carter wept inconsolably before the altar, a shadow of her former self, pale and red-eyed. When everyone had gathered, Violet Carter tremblingly pulled a white handkerchief from her bosom. Unfolding it, she looked at Mrs. Taylor and Vanessa, saying, "Tong Yi was holding this. Last night, she came to me in a dream, saying she shouldn't have been so curious as to try on her aunt's bracelet, but she truly loved it. Could I ask Vanessa to give her the bracelet?" Vanessa stood beside Mrs. Taylor, listening to Violet Carter, glancing at the bracelet. "I knew she wouldn't let me go easily, but I didn't expect her to use her daughter's death to play tricks." Mrs. Taylor looked at Vanessa, her heart aching, and said, "Fifth girl, now that Dong Yi is gone, give her the bracelet, and I'll have someone make you another one." Vanessa obediently nodded. At this moment, Violet Carter spoke up, "Fifth sister, Dong Yi said she hoped you could personally place the bracelet beside her. Would you?" Vanessa stared into Violet Carter's eyes for a long moment. Violet Carter gritted her teeth, watching her reaction, truly worried she wouldn't agree. However, contrary to her expectations, Vanessa agreed, then stepped away from Mrs. Taylor's side and walked towards the coffin where Violet Carter was standing. The white mourning clothes she wore, hastily made, didn't quite fit. After 2 steps, she tripped on the hem, her small, thin frame appearing clumsy. When she finally reached Violet Carter, Vanessa tripped on her hem again, suddenly falling forward. Her whole body tumbled down, knocking over several candlesticks and offerings in front of the coffin. Servants rushed to help her up and quickly rearranged everything. Violet Carter couldn't help but sneer inwardly. She really didn't understand why such a fool was so blessed. "Sister-in-law, please don't be too sad. I think Dong Yi will definitely live well in the other world," Vanessa said, her eyes red-rimmed, looking at Violet Carter. Then, she reached out and took the bracelet. Then, as everyone watched, she placed the bracelet inside the coffin with her own hands. Seeing Vanessa return to the crowd, Violet Carter couldn't help but look at Richard Carter, who was standing not far away. "This time, I will make her life a living hell." Hashtag Chapter 7, Cold laughter, false accusations. Afterwards, everyone began to busy themselves. By the time Violet Carter and her entourage returned to the Taylor mansion, it was already dark. Violet Carter returned to her courtyard and collapsed onto a chair in grief. Ronan Taylor was about to pour her some water, but discovered there was no tea left in the room, so he had to go out. Returning, he personally placed the cup of tea in Violet Carter's hand. "You're tired. Drink some water." Violet Carter took the tea from him and, without a second thought, drank several sips. As evening fell, Violet Carter waited outside for any movement. But not long after, she felt uncomfortable, especially on her face, which felt itchy. Later, she really couldn't bear it, so she lit a lamp and called Ronan Taylor to take a look. Ronan Taylor took one look and nearly fell out of bed, pointing at Violet Carter's face and stammering in horror, Your face, your face." Violet Carter's heart sank. She ran to the bronze mirror, so frightened that she almost thought she had seen a ghost. Her face was covered in swollen red welts. Moreover, the redder the spots, the itchier they were. After she scratched a few times, the swollen areas burst open. "Doctor! Call a doctor! Quickly!" Violet Carter screamed, calling for Ronan Taylor. Vanessa was still awake. Not long after, Lillian Li reported that there seemed to be some commotion in the second young master's courtyard, and she didn't know what had happened. Hearing this, Vanessa gave a cold laugh and lay down. Under the dim light, she extended her hand, fingertips still slightly swollen and red. During the day, she pretended to fall, and while no one was looking, she dipped her hand into a bowl of candle wax. Then, after the wax had dried, she grabbed Violet Carter's poisoned bracelet, thus avoiding disaster. If Violet Carter had acted so cruelly towards her, how could Vanessa let her off the hook? Waiting until she knew Violet Carter was about to return, she used the excuse of bringing things over to comfort her second brother and sister-in-law, went to Violet Carter's courtyard, and secretly emptied all the water in their room. Afterwards, she put several poisonous candle wax pieces into a bowl to melt. Before Ronan Taylors could send someone to fetch water, she brought the modified bowl of water to him. If she knew it was from Vanessa, Violet Carter definitely wouldn't drink it, but given by her husband, she probably wouldn't suspect anything. Vanessa didn't know what kind of poison it was, but whatever it was, Violet Carter brought it upon herself. With Violet Carter ill, there was finally some peace for a few days. That afternoon, Mrs. Taylor, Livia, and Vanessa were discussing a visit to the temple for a Thanksgiving ceremony in the pavilion. Violet Carter stormed in angrily, ordering her maid to place a large bag of items in front of Mrs. Taylor, her sharp words directed at Vanessa, "Mother, you must uphold justice for your daughter-in-law." After saying this, she burst into tears. Violet Carter still had a few scars on her face, but they were covered with powder, making them less noticeable. As she cried, the powder fell off, making the sight quite repulsive. "What's going on?" Mrs. Taylor asked, frowning. "Mother, these are the things I found in Fifth Sister's room, but they originally belonged to Tong Yi and me. Yet, she dared to steal so many of our things." Violet Carter didn't hold back. "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Taylor clearly didn't believe her. "Mother, these servants can all testify for me. I really just found these things at Fifth Sister Vanessa's place." Violet Carter glared at Vanessa and continued, "I know Fifth Sister has just recovered and is probably curious about everything, but even if she likes our things, she can't steal them. If she had asked, would I not have given them to her?" "Mother, I didn't do it." Vanessa looked at Mrs. Taylor and shook her head. "Then how do you explain these things?" Violet Carter clearly didn't want to give her a chance to breathe. "Mother, you must give me justice. I can pretend nothing happened, but Father hates these shady dealings the most. If he finds out, he definitely won't spare Fifth Sister. Therefore, I think Fifth Sister should be sent to the secluded residence for strict discipline by the governesses." Chapter 8, Confusion. The haunting nightmare. Wasn't this just a way to send her away and then find a time, unknown to anyone, to deal with her? Vanessa secretly sneered inwardly. How could she not be familiar with these tactics? Mrs. Taylor still didn't believe, deep down, that Vanessa would do such a thing. The master of the house is about to arrive. If we really want Vanessa to study, she can do so within the residence. "Mother, are you truly not afraid of Father noticing this matter?" Violet Carter clearly disagreed with Mrs. Taylor's words. Just as Mrs. Taylor was about to speak, a clear voice broke the silence. "Greetings, madam, young ladies." Vanessa's gaze snapped towards the voice. One glance, and her thoughts scattered like smoke. It was as if an atomic bomb detonated in her chest, shattering her composure, stealing her breath. How could this be? It can't be. What is he doing here? Vanessa nearly stumbled, her blood turning to ice. She felt as though she were hallucinating, but if it were a hallucination, why were his features so vividly real? "I am Henry Owen, the new private tutor. The housekeeper instructed me to seek out the mistress." Henry Owen spoke again, his expression neither arrogant nor fawning. Vanessa felt a stinging in her nose, tears threatening to spill, but a sharp pain pierced her heart, and hatred flooded her wounded soul. Lillian Li sensed her mistress's distress, her hand gripped painfully tight. But as she took in Henry Owen's gentle features, refined bearing, and quiet strength, her heart quickened, forgetting everything else. Mrs. Taylor assessed Henry Owen, nodding in satisfaction. Violet Carter gritted her teeth, clearly surprised by his sudden appearance. Since the tutor has arrived, Vanessa needn't go to the villa. Butterfly, arrange for the children's schooling and take them home. Mrs. Taylor said, looking at Henry Owen. Henry Owen understood, replying, rest assured, madam, I will instruct them well. Violet Carter snorted at Vanessa but said nothing. Without another word, Henry Owen departed. To everyone's astonishment, Vanessa, who had been sitting beside them, abruptly stood and rushed out. Vanessa! Vanessa! Where are you going? Vanessa, Mrs. Taylor, caught completely off guard, watched Vanessa's unsteady flight with mounting alarm. Without hesitation, Lillian Li chased after Vanessa. Mistress! Mistress! Vanessa ran as if possessed, her panicked footfalls pounding against her heart. Her legs moved mechanically, driven by the desperate need to escape. In that instant, her tranquil heart felt trampled by 1,000 hooves, shattering before the pain could register. Suddenly, Vanessa's vision blurred, the path ahead disappearing. Ignoring everything else, she cried out in fury, Nathan Brock, you stop right there. Nathan Brock. Nathan Brock. That name, so intimately familiar, now ripped from Vanessa's lips, carried the weight of 1,000 curses. Nathan Brock, you bastard. Stop. Tell me, why did you do this to me? Even if you didn't love me, you shouldn't have conspired with my sister against me. Nathan Brock, Vanessa doubled over, screaming with all her might, her eyes blazing with hatred. Henry Owen hesitated for a moment before emerging from behind the rockery. Seeing Vanessa's utter anguish, a ripple of emotion crossed his composed features. He spoke, breaking the desolate silence, Mistress. Is there anything I can do to assist you? The voice, clear and light as an autumn breeze, unhurried and calm, startled Vanessa. She looked up and saw, in the vibrant glow of the setting sun, a familiar face slowly coming into focus. Almost instinctively, in the next second, she lunged forward and slapped him hard. A stinging pain shot across Henry Owen's face, and a flicker of surprise crossed his eyes. Miss. Vanessa stubbornly refused to open her eyes, her arms wrapped tightly around him. Lillian Li, having finally caught up to Vanessa, witnessed the embrace. Her mouth dropped open in astonishment before she rushed to Vanessa's side and pulled her away. Miss, ####, Chapter 9, the wretch, unable to bear the solitude. Henry Owen took a quiet step back, his tone cool, polite, and distant. Miss, you are mistaken. I am Henry Owen, the new tutor at the manor, not Master Brock. Vanessa gripped Lillian Li's hand, a bitter smile touching her pale face. She knew he wasn't Nathan Brock, but she simply refused to acknowledge it. I apologize for the misunderstanding, sir. Vanessa fought back the surge of bitterness in her throat, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and resolve. Glancing down, she noticed the bloodstains from her own clothes on his light blue garments. Turning to Lillian Li, she instructed, have someone send 2 sets of clean clothes to the tutor later. Henry Owen's calm, cloud-like expression remained unperturbed. He simply shook his head. It's all right. They can be washed. Don't trouble yourself, Mississippi. Vanessa stared impassively into Henry Owen's eyes, unyielding. Lillian Li, remember to send them. Don't forget. Lillian Li nodded obediently. Yes, Mississippi. Silence fell over the 3 of them. Lillian Li looked from Vanessa to Henry Owen, puzzled. Something felt strange about her mistress's gaze, a lingering pain and hatred that tugged at her heart. Had she not heard the heart-wrenching cry with which her mistress had called out a name just moments ago, she would have thought her perpetually cold and aloof. But how could her mistress, who had been in a daze for over a decade and only recently recovered, knows someone named Nathan Brock. Lillian Lee had been by her side constantly, practically her shadow, yet she had detected nothing suspicious. "Miss, I have matters to attend to. Please excuse me." Henry Owen bowed slightly and turned, walking away with an air of casual indifference. His slender, elegant figure conveyed a distinct detachment. Vanessa watched him go, numbly. This time, she simply let him walk away, making no attempt to follow. In those few short minutes, clarity had returned to Vanessa. Those she had once held dear were gone from this world forever. She didn't even have the chance for revenge. "Miss," Lillian Lee guided Vanessa back, trying several times to voice the questions swirling in her mind. Seeing Vanessa's state, she felt a deep worry. "Lillian Lee, don't worry. I'm fine. I had a dream, and the man in my dream looked exactly like him. I mistook the dream for reality and lost control for a moment." Vanessa looked directly at Lillian Lee, her explanation earnest. "Really?" Lillian Lee asked, skeptical. "If not, what do you think?" Vanessa stopped, staring at her. Lillian Lee shook her head quickly. "Miss, I didn't mean to doubt you, really. Besides, in this world, you are the person I trust the most, of course I trust you the most." Looking at Lillian Lee's utterly sincere appearance, Vanessa patted her hand, continued walking forward, and after a while, spoke gloomily, "Even I don't trust myself, why do you trust me so much?" Lillian Lee followed closely behind Vanessa, instinctively wanting to say that she did trust her and would make her completely trust her too, but the words reached her lips, and she swallowed them. At midnight, Vanessa waited for Lillian Lee to fall asleep, then carefully left the attic alone, wandering aimlessly in the darkness. Vanessa couldn't remember how many sleepless nights this was, especially after meeting Henry Owen. Her heart simply couldn't calm down. She originally came to the private school so she could see him, but from their first encounter, she had felt a repulsion towards Henry Owen. In a blink, she arrived at that quiet garden again, and she didn't know if it was her imagination, but behind the rockery, there seemed to be Violet Carter's laughter again. Vanessa then remembered that day, just like now, she sat foolishly on the rockery. If it weren't for those lewd sounds, she probably would have sat there until dark. She initially didn't care who the sneaking person was, until Violet Carter wanted her dead. It hadn't been long, and she couldn't stand the loneliness, sneaking out again in the middle of the night to do this despicable thing. Chapter 10, The Shameless Man. Vanessa sneered, thinking of Violet Carter's face, and the saying, "A leopard can't change its spots," came to mind. Her already gloomy mood worsened, and Vanessa no longer had the heart to continue walking, so she turned around and went back. Not long after she left, a dark figure rushed out from behind the rockery. Looking at the figure, it was clearly a strong man. After walking for a while, Vanessa noticed the footsteps behind her continuing, always maintaining a consistent distance, neither too close nor too far. Had she been discovered? Vanessa frowned, her pace gradually quickening. The man behind her had steady, powerful strides, a nimble figure, neither fast nor slow, as if intentionally toying with Vanessa, not rushing to approach. The more Vanessa walked, the more her heart surged. If it were Violet Carter, she might not be afraid of her, but if it were a tall, strong man intending to harm her, she would have to find a way to escape the danger. She had to remember that she was now defenseless, without martial arts skills or any other abilities. Moreover, it was so late now that the guards would be hard-pressed to notice her, so she could only rely on herself. Fortunately, she reached the attic in a flash. Vanessa gritted her teeth, slipped into the courtyard, then held her breath, hiding in the shadows, clutching a stone in her hand. Before Vanessa could react, not far away, a dark figure jumped over the outer wall and silently landed in the courtyard. Vanessa gritted her teeth silently. So this adulterer knew martial arts. It seemed she was in grave danger today. The dark figure, familiar with the path, entered the attic and arrived at Vanessa's bedroom in the blink of an eye. Vanessa had intended to seize the opportunity to sneak out and call for help, but thinking of Lillian Lee sleeping inside, she worried that the man might mistakenly harm her. Lillian Lee was her only comfort in this foreign land, and she couldn't let her die because of her. Gritting her teeth, Vanessa decided to take a risk. She quietly followed the dark figure into the room, holding her breath, then raised her hand with all her might, intending to strike the man's head. Just then, Lillian Lee, holding a lamp, sleepily called out, "Miss." Vanessa's mind went blank. She tripped over a chair, lost her balance, and fell to the ground. The dark figure abruptly turned around, saw Vanessa on the floor, and let out a confused, "Huh," staring at her, puzzled by her actions. Lillian Lee instantly woke up. When she saw the man standing before her, she couldn't help but scream. Vanessa struggled, glared at the man, and said furiously, "I saw you and my second sister-in-law together. If you have anything to settle, settle it with me. Lillian Lee knows nothing. If you have the guts, kill me. Otherwise, sooner or later, you'll regret provoking me." The man stared at Vanessa in astonishment. Lillian Lee rushed to Vanessa's side and helped her up. "Miss, he is." "Lillian Lee, don't say it. Go." Vanessa pushed Lillian Lee away, urging her to leave. Lillian Lee, worried, dramatically tugged at Vanessa's sleeve. "Miss. It's not, he won't." "Lillian Lee, why are you still standing there? Go." Vanessa lost her patience, her eyes fixed fiercely on the man, her aura intimidating. "My life is my own. Even if I can't live, I'll drag you down with me. Miss, four." Vanessa turned around and glared at Lillian Lee. "I don't need you to care, even if I die. Fourth young master." Lillian Lee pulled at Vanessa, finally finishing her sentence. "Fourth brother." Vanessa frowned, turning to look at the man before her. Nicholas Taylor winked at Vanessa, grinning. "Fifth sister, long time no see." Vanessa looked at him coldly, her face expressionless. "Fifth sister, it's me, your brilliant, all-powerful, unparalleled martial arts expert fourth brother. Don't you recognize me?" Nicholas Taylor grinned, his peach blossom eyes sparkling. "Don't recognize you," Vanessa said without hesitation, then pushed him away, sat down on a chair, and rubbed her aching foot. "Aren't you ashamed, sneaking into a woman's room in the middle of the night?" Hashtag Chapter 11, Who is he? What's he to me? Nicholas Taylor casually sat down beside her, poured himself a cup of water without asking, and muttered, "I heard you recovered from your serious illness. I was wondering if it was true. Now that I see you, you're really different. Get out of my room." After the commotion, Vanessa's mood worsened. Moreover, the fact that her fourth brother was involved with her second sister-in-law disgusted her. "Fifth sister, your illness is cured, but why has your personality changed so much?" Nicholas Taylor finally noticed Vanessa's impatience, and ultimately, he still felt unwilling. "I'm your fourth brother, do you truly not recognize me anymore?" "Don't know you." Vanessa feigned annoyance, unwilling to look at that face for another second. Nicholas Taylor pouted, "Then what about the past, have you forgotten everything?" Vanessa frowned. Why did everyone ask her about the past? What did the past have to do with her? She had absolutely no interest in knowing. "Do you really not remember anything?" Nicholas Taylor approached Vanessa, wanting to discern something from her eyes. The closer he got, the stronger the smell of alcohol and woman's perfume wafted into Vanessa's nose, making her even more disgusted. The man before her was clearly a debauched playboy, immersed in wine and women all day long. "No." Vanessa stood up and turned to go inside. "Lillian Lee, quickly get him out of here." "Then that's great." Nicholas Taylor chuckled and stood up, speaking to Vanessa's back, "Fifth sister, don't worry, even if you forget me, I will still treat you well and definitely keep my promise." It's getting late, you should rest early, I'll be going now. As he spoke, he was already out the door. Vanessa vaguely saw a dark shadow flicker on the wall, then disappear completely. Looking at that behavior, he was no different from a thief, not at all like someone from a scholarly family. Even in his own home, he had to climb walls. It seemed that even the Grand Tutor couldn't raise a decent son. Lillian Li closed the door and looked at Vanessa cautiously, saying, "Miss, please don't be angry anymore. The young master didn't do it on purpose." Before, when the young master came home late, he would also be like just now, quietly come in to pour a drink or have a snack. "It's just that you don't remember." "Is that so?" Vanessa said absent-mindedly, lying down again. The promise Nicholas Taylor mentioned came back to her mind. She really didn't understand how many secrets of others this silly girl knew before. "Yes, miss." Lillian Li tucked Vanessa in, hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Miss, what you said just now about the young master and the second madam, were you being overly worried? Just pretend you didn't hear anything about this, don't worry about it anymore, go to sleep." After saying that, Vanessa turned over, facing away from Lillian Li, pretending to sleep. The next day at noon, during lunch, Vanessa encountered Nicholas Taylor again, but this time his appearance was completely different from last night. His jet-black hair was neatly tied up with a jade hairpin. He wore a white robe with pale gold patterns shimmering under the sunlight. A blue jade pendant hung at his waist, further accentuating his tall, handsome, and elegant figure, giving him the air of a jade tree in the forest, his demeanor completely overshadowing the dissolute young master from last night. "Vanessa, this is your fourth brother, come and greet him." Mrs. Taylor waved to Vanessa, who was standing at the door. Vanessa looked disdainfully at that flirtatious face, always feeling that this serious man was just putting on an act. However, his acting wasn't bad. Nicholas Taylor acted as if it were the first time he had seen Vanessa after her recovery. Before she could approach, he stepped forward, pretending to take her hand, and spoke to her in the tone of an elder brother. Mrs. Taylor's eyes followed Nicholas Taylor, a doting smile on her face, clearly pleased with her son. Violet Carter, as their sister-in-law, called out, "Fourth brother, fifth brother, come eat. Don't just stand there." Nicholas Taylor politely thanked his second sister-in-law. Violet Carter, captivated by his charming smile, couldn't stop grinning. Watching their interaction, Vanessa felt nauseated, losing her appetite. Chapter 12, Dare to do it, but not own up. Coward. Lydia Taylor entered, a composed smile gracing her face, an ethereal aura surrounding her. Her clear voice and captivating words charmed everyone, especially Nicholas Taylor, who grinned unabashedly, his sweet-talking manner both irritating and endearing. Over the next few days, Vanessa frequently encountered Nicholas Taylor, who seemed perpetually idle, openly living off his family. The two Taylor patriarchs appeared to have given up on him, letting him do as he pleased. Today, Vanessa and Lillian Li caught him in the act again. Seeing Vanessa, Nicholas Taylor, unfazed, adjusted his clothes and strolled over, greeting her with a smile, "Fifth sister, fancy meeting you here. What brings you out today?" Vanessa ignored him, pulling Lillian Li forward. However, Nicholas Taylor noticed her disdainful glance. Undeterred, he followed, feigning hurt, "Vanessa, why are you always so cold to me? Have I offended you? If it's about that night, I apologize, all right?" Vanessa continued to ignore him. Recalling the fleeing maid, Nicholas Taylor's eyes flickered with understanding. "Did you hear anything that night?" he asked pointedly. Vanessa, without pausing, retorted, "Dare to do it, but not own up. Coward." Nicholas Taylor faltered, then quickly caught up. "Vanessa, let me explain. That night, I really... Since you've admitted it, there's nothing more to say." Vanessa pushed him aside and continued walking. Lillian Li glanced at Nicholas Taylor, then at Vanessa, and after a moment's hesitation, followed Vanessa. Vanessa, thinking she'd lost him, was surprised when Nicholas Taylor suddenly reappeared in front of her, grinning mischievously. "My dear sister, you can be angry, but don't insult my taste. I haven't kissed many women. Violet Carter. If second brother hadn't married her, do you think I'd even glance her way?" "Humph. Weren't you exchanging flirtatious glances at dinner?" As if reading her mind, Nicholas Taylor continued, "I know Violet Carter and her maternal cousin have a shady relationship. If she hadn't tried to betroth her daughter to her cousin's son, I'd have thought Evelyn Taylor wasn't eldest brother's child." Vanessa stopped. "So you used yourself as bait that night to find out the truth?" Lillian Lee's face had paled. She instinctively scanned their surroundings, worried about eavesdroppers. Vanessa looked up at Nicholas Taylor. "Now that you know, why haven't you done anything about her? What did she do to you before?" Nicholas Taylor countered, his tone matter-of-fact. A flicker of something unreadable flashed in his usually flirtatious eyes, so quick it could have been an illusion. Vanessa's eyes deepened, she said nothing. "Fifth sister, don't you worry, I'll take care of this. It's just not the right time yet. When the time comes, I'll definitely avenge you. Roast or steam, it's your choice." Nicholas Taylor stared into Vanessa's eyes, winking playfully, almost teasingly, as if he wasn't being sincere at all. Vanessa scoffed inwardly. She knew better than to trust this guy even a little. Without pausing, she continued forward. Passing a corridor, she heard the melodious sound of a stringed instrument drifting from afar. Turning her head, she saw Livia Taylor playing at the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Livia wore a pristine white robe, a peach-colored shawl draped around her waist. Her hair was neatly tied up, adorned with sparkling jewels that accentuated her exquisite features. Her skin glowed radiantly under the sunlight. She resembled a smiling lotus flower, graceful and elegant. Lillian Lee had mentioned before that Livia Taylor was far from idle. Poetry, music, history, the classics, playing instruments, calligraphy, painting, even cooking and sewing, she mastered them all. Apart from sleeping and eating, almost all her time was devoted to these pursuits. The Taylor family had clearly invested heavily in her upbringing. Chapter 13, Idiot, playing the lute to a cow with such rigorous training for Livia. Vanessa had previously thought that Livia's life was destined for a high and lofty position. Moreover, royal tutor Taylor had always been striving for this. However, Lillian Lee had mentioned just 2 days ago that the current emperor was unwell after the loss of the crown prince, and no one dared to mention the selection of concubines for the time being. Livia remained at home, but everyone understood that her entry into the palace was only a matter of time. Vanessa had been wondering why royal tutor Taylor was always at home. It turned out to be because of the crown prince's death. Before a new heir was appointed, he could recuperate at home. Whether he was truly as upright as he appeared, Vanessa didn't want to speculate. She didn't want to interfere in other people's fates. After all, her reputation for being foolish was widespread, which might allow her to live peacefully for a few more years. Admire? Nicholas Taylor suddenly appeared beside Vanessa, arms crossed, casually observing Livia in the distance, like a bright moon, his eyes shining without concealment. Compared to such frivolous things, I'd rather live a peaceful life. You clearly don't have Livia's capabilities. Nicholas Taylor looked at Vanessa with disdain. You've been an idiot for over a decade, illiterate and ignorant. Music and poetry require intellect and high EQ to cultivate. Even if you wanted to learn, you couldn't. However, seeing your infatuation, perhaps studying with a tutor for a while might allow you to grasp a few superficialities. First, stop daydreaming. Livia's talents are innate. Vanessa, annoyed by his condescending tone, retorted, casting pearls before swine. My goodness, such enlightenment. Nicholas Taylor uncrossed his arms, stepped in front of Vanessa, blocking her path, and grinned mischievously. Just regained your senses and already so self-aware. Perhaps you really could learn a trick or two. Starting tomorrow, you should attend private tutoring. Let fourth brother broaden his horizons, shall we? Nicholas Taylor finished speaking, laughing heartily, his spirit soaring, his face radiant, but somehow it looked dazzling, and he himself was unaware of it. Hearing this, Vanessa couldn't laugh, instead, she felt a pang in her heart. Nicholas Taylor had only meant to joke with Vanessa, but he hadn't expected her to react this way. Thinking his jest had gone too far, touching upon Vanessa's past vulnerability as a fool, he quickly retracted his brazen grin and looked at Vanessa appeasingly, a hint of panic in his eyes. Don't cry, sister. I was only joking. If you don't like it, don't take it to heart. Vanessa lifted her head, staring at him intently, the moisture in her eyes still lingering. Nicholas Taylor grew even more flustered, his usually upward-tilted peach blossom eyes now anxious, even a bit clumsy. He racked his brains, trying to figure out how to cheer Vanessa up. After a long silence, Vanessa slowly raised her head, as if having decided something, and softly said, I'll go. Huh? Nicholas Taylor couldn't quite keep up with her. Fifth sister, if you don't want to go, then don't. I said I'll go. Vanessa interrupted him without hesitation, then looked him straight in the eye, repeating with utmost determination, I will go see him. Nicholas Taylor watched Vanessa gradually walk away, a little puzzled about what had just happened, scratching his head. When Vanessa told Mrs. Taylor that she had finally agreed to go to the private school, Mrs. Taylor looked very pleased. Actually, it wasn't exactly a private school. The number of students could be counted on one hand. Evelyn Taylor had studied there before, and now that she was gone, the school was much quieter. Vanessa didn't know the other students. It seemed that among them was Richard Carter's son, Chu Shuheo, the boy who had once been betrothed to Evelyn Taylor. When Vanessa saw Henry Owen again, she tried to control her emotions and greeted him politely. Today, Henry Owen wore a loose-sleeved robe, appearing aloof yet courteous. His eyes, always seemingly veiled in mist, gave him an enigmatic air, making it hard to discern his thoughts. Chapter 14, Sarcasm. Utterly despising him, he seemed to have completely forgotten Vanessa's previous rudeness, returning her greeting respectfully, maintaining a teacher-student distance that was neither too close nor too distant. Young Chu's expression was strange when he saw Vanessa arrive at school. Besides shock, there was also resentment. He kept staring at her from the moment she appeared. Can anyone recite the poem I taught yesterday? Henry Owen's gaze swept over each student, his voice as clear as his person. The final sound lingered for a moment, like ripples on water. The children immediately wore pained expressions, lowering their heads slightly, not daring to look at Henry Owen. Henry Owen didn't let them off the hook, calling out a name directly. Chu Shuheo, recite it once. I. Young Chu stammered, unable to recite the poem. But seeing Henry Owen's expectant gaze, he gritted his teeth and said, fishing. Henry Owen called on two other students, but neither could recite the poem completely. Since you haven't completed your assignment, you'll stay for half an hour after school. If. Henry Owen's eyes scanned the children. Vanessa instinctively recited, fishing in the jade-green bay, spring deep, apricot blossoms swirl. Clear pond, mistaking shallows, lotus stirs, fish scatter. Henry Owen's indifferent gaze suddenly warmed, then shifted to disbelief. Little Chu was even more astonished, his jaw dropping wide enough to swallow a chicken egg, as if he'd seen a ghost in broad daylight. In truth, Vanessa hadn't expected to be able to recite poetry. In that moment, she only wished for Henry Owen's gaze to linger on her a little longer. Moreover, she had no idea whether Henry Owen had taught her this poem or not. A flicker of awkwardness crossed Henry Owen's usually composed face. Miss Vanessa. Sir, you find it strange, don't you? Vanessa smiled at Henry Owen, fabricating a tale. Actually, after waking up that day, I discovered I could read. After reading some books, I memorized a few poems. Henry Owen paused, seemingly accepting this explanation. After all, even a simpleton could regain their senses. The sudden ability to read and write didn't seem so far-fetched, especially with Mrs. Taylor's constant prayers. Perhaps it truly was a divine intervention. However, during class, Henry Owen was frequently distracted, his gaze involuntarily drifting towards Vanessa. Yet, each time she met his eyes, he quickly looked away. After class, all the children except Vanessa scampered off. Vanessa deliberately lingered, her eyes fixed on Henry Owen. Soon, she noticed something unusual about him. Knowing full well the difference between him and Nathan Brock, she still addressed him as, "Sir, please wait." "Miss Vanessa, what can I do for you?" Henry Owen turned, a hint of inquiry in his eyes. "Sir, do you often suffer from bloating and indigestion?" Henry Owen was taken aback. Vanessa gave a faint smile. Seeing his gaze still fixed on her, a wave of mockery washed over her, but she continued her charade. 2 fresh duck gizzards, 2 coins worth of koik seeds, 2 coins worth of malt sugar, 1 ounce of Cotinopsis root. Wash thoroughly, add sufficient water, simmer over low heat until the gizzards are tender. Season with salt and spices before serving. Drink the broth and eat the gizzards. Though simple, this remedy, taken consistently, yields remarkable results. If you trust me, sir, you might try it. Henry Owen remained stunned, seemingly lost in thought. Vanessa curtsied and turned to leave. After 2 steps, she looked back and added, "Porridge and noodles are relatively easy to digest. You might consider incorporating them into your diet, sir." "Miss." Henry Owen snapped out of his reverie and called out somewhat urgently to Vanessa as she reached the door. He stared at her intently. "Where did you learn these things?" Vanessa, no longer meeting his gaze, simply uttered, "In a dream," before vanishing from his sight. She hadn't gone far when she saw Livia, radiant as a celestial being, approaching Henry Owen from another direction. Livia's face was flushed like a peach blossom, her eyes sparkling with an unmistakable brilliance. Though Vanessa couldn't hear their exchange, Livia's expression spoke volumes. #### Chapter 15, Indifference, Pain Indeed, men like him certainly attract a lot of attention. As she reached the courtyard gate, Lillian Lee greeted her with a smile. "Miss, how was your day? Did you enjoy your lessons? Did Mr. Owen say anything?" Vanessa gazed at Lillian Lee with an expectant look, hazy, as if they'd only just met. Seeing Vanessa's distraction, Lillian Lee quickly pulled her down to sit, pouring her a glass of water. "Miss, are you tired? Do you need to rest? Are you hungry? Have a little snack first, I'll have dinner prepared immediately." Lillian Lee. Vanessa clutched the glass, addressing the bustling Lillian Lee, forcing the words out, "What's Henry Owen's connection to Taylor Manor? Why is he here, working as a tutor?" Hearing this, Lillian Lee returned to Vanessa's side, recounting all she'd heard. "Mr. Owen is one of the greatest scholars in our heavenly Qi kingdom, truly gifted in both literature and martial arts. He was famous in his youth, and at that time, he wholeheartedly aspired to pass the imperial examinations and establish a distinguished career. However, for reasons unknown, he offended Prime Minister Moro, and his hopes were repeatedly dashed. In his anger, he penned a powerful essay exposing the Moro family, accusing the Prime Minister of wielding excessive power, and Empress Moro of overshadowing the Emperor, suppressing officials, and disrupting the court. The Prime Minister was furious and wanted to execute him on the spot, but the old master, valuing his talent, saved him with great effort. Afterward, he arranged for Mr. Owen to stay at Taylor Manor, accepting him as a student. "He's so proud, how could he possibly take this small private school seriously?" Vanessa murmured, her mind filled with that familiar face, ancient robes and modern t-shirts flickering over him. "If he's destined for greatness, it's naturally preordained." Lillian Lee smiled dreamily, no matter where he is, the master always stands out. The Moro family, is it truly as he says? Vanessa's eyes were vacant, unfocused, her voice indifferent. Lillian Li furrowed her brow in thought. I've previously overheard the old master and the two young masters discussing the current situation. The Moro family's influence is complex and shouldn't be underestimated. Moreover, after the crown prince's death, the emperor has been indulging in pleasures, leaving many important matters to the empress and the prime minister. This is a well-known fact. Vanessa seemed not to hear, still staring blankly at the face in the mirror, her eyes empty. Are they truly unrelated? Miss, what are you saying? Lillian Li hadn't heard clearly. When her gaze fell upon Vanessa, she saw her sitting listlessly, as if her soul were absent. The word demon instinctively flashed through her mind. Just then, Vanessa abruptly stood, startling Lillian Li, who stumbled back a step, nearly falling. In a blink, Vanessa had strode out of the room. Miss, where are you going? Wait for me. Miss. Lillian Li, regaining her senses, chased after her. Henry Owen looked up in surprise at Vanessa's sudden appearance in his courtyard. His hand, poised to pour water, froze mid-air. After a moment, he regained his composure and spoke, "May I ask what brings Fifth Miss here at this hour?" Vanessa looked at him with a frantic gaze, asking a disjointed question, "If one day I suddenly disappear, and never reappear, will you remember me?" Henry Owen stood motionless, his expression unusually serious. "Miss, you should know I'm not Nathan Brock, and I cannot answer any of your questions for him. If you truly want to know, you should ask him yourself." "Do you think I don't want to?" Vanessa clenched her fists, suppressing a scream. "I vanished, inexplicably transported here, without even a chance to question him. Even if you asked, you already know the answer, don't you, miss?" Henry Owen's quiet words cut Vanessa like a knife. Chapter 16, How laughable, I am a laughingstock. She nodded silently. "Yes, what's the point? In the end, he doesn't love me." "But, sir." Vanessa approached, eyes burning with intensity. "Why didn't he love me, yet stayed by my side for so long, accepting my kindness? Was it just to witness my despair at his betrayal?" Henry Owen didn't answer, letting Vanessa grip his arm, her questions hanging in the air. "I treated them so well, why did they treat me like this? Even my family is gone." Vanessa released Henry Owen's arm. "A sincere heart gets no reward. I'll never be true to anyone again. I'd rather they suffer because of me than I suffer for them, even a little. Miss, there's no need for this. Sir, don't worry, I won't mistake you for him again." Vanessa wiped her tears and walked away without looking back. Late at night, Vanessa dreamt of Nathan Brock. On a snowy afternoon, beneath the Ferris wheel, he held her hand and hesitantly said, "Lily Taylor, we're not right for each other. Let's break up." Vanessa laughed, feeling the cold snowflakes on her skin even in her dream. She gritted her teeth and flung his warm hand away. Ironically, they met again in the pouring rain. Lily Taylor watched as Nathan Brock stood beside Nina Thompson, saw herself thrown out by Nina Thompson, and felt herself fall in the cold rain. The rain was too heavy, Lily Taylor couldn't see his face clearly. Violet Carter knelt before the Buddha statue in the main hall, feigning devotion. After receiving her fortune, she told the servants, "I'll consult the abbot. Wait here." She took only her personal maid to the inner hall, but was pulled into a deserted meditation room. Her maid, unsurprised, stood guard at the door. "Cousin, why arrange our meeting here?" Violet Carter complained to Richard Carter upon seeing him. "There's no need for such caution. Everyone here knows you. Don't you dare speak like that." Richard Carter gripped Violet Carter's shoulders, pulling her close, his face grim. "If Royal Tutor Taylor learns of our relationship, do you think you'd remain in the Taylor household?" Cowed by his intensity, Violet Carter muttered, no one knows. That little maid saw us. Richard Carter glared at the witless woman before him. If she weren't useful, he'd throw her out. Yes, it did see it, but it missed its chance. Now there's no proof, who would believe it? Besides, haven't we always been looking for ways to eliminate it? Violet Carter gazed at the man before her with longing, her voice dripping with seduction. Richard Carter brushed aside Violet Carter's hand from his chest, his eyes cold as he looked at the unreasonable woman before him. If we fail to complete the mission assigned by our superiors, do you know what the consequences will be? Violet Carter shivered under his icy gaze, her seductive smile twisting into a grimace. That foolish girl, she's not foolish anymore. Richard Carter glared at Violet Carter. If you can't stay in Taylor Manor, then you're completely worthless. What do you think will happen to a useless pawn in the end? I don't care about pawns now. She killed my daughter, and I will have my revenge. Violet Carter clutched her handkerchief tightly. A vein throbbed in Richard Carter's forehead as he gritted his teeth. Who was it that swore they would deal with that nuisance? I've been away for so many days, and you haven't accomplished anything. Seeing Richard Carter's genuine anger, Violet Carter hastily put on a conciliatory smile. Cousin, I didn't mean for things to go this way. I promise I won't let that girl ruin our plans again. Don't worry. ### Chapter 17, Brother, you're hurting me. Richard Carter sat down heavily, still fuming. You'd better not. Violet Carter nodded repeatedly. Cousin, I assure you, I'll handle everything. Then, she snuggled up against Richard Carter, curiosity in her voice. Cousin, who are we working for? Why have they had us watching Taylor Manor for so many years? Is there some kind of secret hidden there? Just do your job and mind your own business. Richard Carter poured himself a cup of water and drained it in one gulp. Has Royal Tutor Taylor done anything unusual lately? Any suspicious individuals appearing at the manor? What keeps the fourth son busy every day? Everything at the manor has been pretty much the same. Nothing suspicious. The old man spends all day in his study writing, rarely seeing anyone. That wastrel of a son is still just indulging in his usual pleasures. Suddenly, Violet Carter's eyes narrowed, a sharp glint appearing in their depths. Speaking of which, he and that girl have been quite close lately. Richard Carter turned to her, his gaze piercing. Then you'd best be wary of them both. Violet Carter snorted. I certainly won't let them get away with anything. Richard Carter's anger gradually subsided. Looking down, he saw Violet Carter's ample bosom pressed against him, forming an alluring curve. The deep cleavage hinted at the smooth, white skin beneath, more than a handful to grasp. As if sensing Richard Carter's heated gaze, Violet Carter's already restless hand grew bolder, while her other hand trailed down his body. Richard Carter frowned deeply, then without hesitation, he captured her wandering hand. Cousin, Violet Carter blushed, her voice soft and coquettish, her seemingly powerless hand continuing its exploration. With a gentle caress, Richard Carter's breath grew heavy, and in the next moment, he swept the woman beside him into his arms. Cousin, you're hurting me, she murmured, yet she pressed herself closer against him. The man, seemingly relishing her eagerness, supported her waist, allowing her to move freely. I'm occupied with pressing matters these days and can't visit you. Upon my return, I expect good news. Then, you'll be handsomely rewarded. With that, he placed her on a chair. Violet Carter bit back a moan of pleasure, her face flushed with satisfaction. She nodded at the man, her voice thick with desire. Rest assured, cousin, I won't disappoint you. Once finished, Richard Carter departed, leaving Violet Carter to linger for a while before returning to Taylor Manor. On her way to report to Mrs. Taylor, she spotted Livia Taylor by the fish pond, her expression vacant. A palpable sadness clung to her, despite her elaborate attire and makeup. Violet Carter approached with a smile. Third sister. Livia Taylor seemed not to hear, methodically tossing pastries from a nearby table into the pond, where the fish quickly gathered. "Third sister, I called you. Why didn't you respond?" Violet Carter glided closer, her gaze sharp as she fixed her eyes on Livia. "I've brought you something special." Livia started at the sound of her voice, then a dazzling smile bloomed on her beautiful face as she tossed another pastry into the water. "Second sister-in-law, are you looking for me?" "Indeed," Violet Carter smiled, settling beside Livia. She produced an item from her sleeve, noting Livia's attentive gaze. Understanding dawned, and she casually placed the object into Livia's hand. "This is a charm I recently acquired from the temple. Keep it with you, it'll bring you a fortunate match." Livia looked at the object in her hand with surprise. "Second sister-in-law, this isn't right. If mother finds out, if we don't tell her, how will she know?" Violet Carter chuckled, clasping Livia's hand and urging her to put the charm away. Chapter 18, Sowing discord. Livia, sensing her sister-in-law's enthusiasm, felt a sudden bitterness. Words she hadn't intended to speak tumbled out. "Sister-in-law, you know the path laid out for me. This is useless. Good or bad, I have no choice." Violet Carter feigned ignorance, replying with a smile, "Nonsense. You're a beautiful young woman, you're destined for a good marriage. Oh, these pastries are exquisite. I'm rather peckish. Do you mind if I have one?" Wait, before Livia could stop her, Violet Carter had already taken a bite. "Delicious. You're quite skilled. Father and mother would sing your praises if they tasted these." Violet Carter continued eating. "Are you taking these to them now?" "I'm on my way to see mother. Shall we go together?" With that, she stood, intending to pull Livia along. "Sister," Livia lifted her head, glancing towards the private school, offering no resistance. Violet Carter sneered inwardly, but her face feigned sudden understanding. "Speaking of the new tutor at the private school, he seems quite dedicated to the children." "So, the sweets," Livia responded gloomily, then quickly changed her tone. "He said educating children is his duty and doesn't require special treatment. I brought these pastries as mother instructed, but he returned them all." "Only Vanessa ate a piece, Vanessa." Violet Carter looked at her, puzzled. "Shouldn't they still be in class at this hour?" Hearing this, Livia's eyes darkened, her cherry lips pressing into a thin line. "Why does that Vanessa cling to the tutor so much? She's not a child anymore. Being alone with him like that, isn't she afraid of gossip? Come to think of it, the other day, I saw her leaving his place late at night, her face tear-stained, like she'd just been crying." As she spoke, Violet Carter stealthily glanced at Livia. "I don't know what they talked about either. Do you think there's something going on between them?" Livia took a deep breath, turned, and looked at Violet Carter with displeasure. "Second sister-in-law, Vanessa is practically family. There's absolutely nothing untoward going on between her and the tutor." Violet Carter inwardly scoffed, surprised by Livia's reaction, but feigned remorse, nodding repeatedly. Right. I was being foolish. I shouldn't have said those things. Actually, you care for her so much, but it's not certain she feels the same way." "What do you mean?" Livia frowned. Violet Carter looked around, pulled Livia closer, and whispered something in her ear. Livia's face changed instantly, her slender fingers whitening with the force of her grip as she clutched the fabric at her side. After a long moment, she gritted out, "Vanessa, how dare you?" Seeing Livia's reaction, Violet Carter was clearly pleased, not forgetting to add fuel to the fire. "I can't believe she would do such a thing. I was always fooled by her innocent appearance. If she stays in the manor any longer, who knows what else she'll do." In a blink, Livia's expression returned to normal, even a peerless smile gracing her beautiful face. "Sister-in-law, I suddenly remembered something I want to give you. Why don't you come to my courtyard and sit for a while?" Without waiting for Violet Carter to reply, Livia pulled her away. About the time it takes to brew a pot of tea, Violet Carter emerged from Livia's room, her expression unreadable. As she left, she cast a meaningful glance back at Livia. Not long after dinner, Vanessa was summoned to the He courtyard by Shui Wen, Livia's maid. Everything in the He courtyard was vastly different from the Pure Heart Pavilion. The decor and arrangements alone spoke volumes about the noble status of its owner, yet it wasn't ostentatious, but rather in harmony with Livia's image. Vanessa, however, seemed indifferent to all this. Her gaze had been fixed on Livia since she entered. "What did you want to see me about?" she asked coldly. Chapter 19, Misunderstanding. Conspiracy. Livia was somewhat surprised by Vanessa's coldness, having meticulously arranged the surroundings with items Vanessa had never seen before. "Sister, you've arrived." Livia skillfully masked her emotions, enthusiastic yet composed. "Come, sit down," Vanessa nodded, walking towards her. Livia's signature fragrance intensified, yet another scent lingered in the room, elusive and almost imaginary. "Third sister, you said you had something important to discuss. Now that I'm here, please speak." Vanessa seemed impatient. Truthfully, she felt indifferent towards Livia. She agreed to come only to clarify that further inquiries about the past were unnecessary and shouldn't cause her any trouble. Livia guided Vanessa to a seat, then instructed Shui Wen, "Why are you still standing there? Bring the things over." Shui Wen acknowledged and left the room. Vanessa glanced at Lillian Li, noticing her curiosity. "Sister, you look unwell. Are the maids not attending to you properly? If you need anything, just tell me. Don't make things difficult for yourself, all right?" Livia feigned concern. "Actually, I called you here for nothing specific, just felt we haven't had a proper chat since your recovery." Vanessa patiently waited for her to continue, her expression impassive, making it difficult to discern her thoughts. Just then, Shui Wen returned with an exquisite box, placing it on the table. As the lid opened, a captivating aroma filled the air. Livia smiled, offering Vanessa a piece of the pastry. This was freshly made. "It's best served warm. Try it." Vanessa stared at Livia's hand momentarily before accepting the pastry and taking a small bite. Surely, summoning her from afar wasn't just for a simple treat. "Delicious?" Livia's voice was soft, like a gentle breeze carrying moisture, tender and heartfelt, brimming with affection. Vanessa nodded. Livia smiled faintly, a hint of bitterness in her expression. "It's a shame the gentleman doesn't like it." Vanessa blinked, realizing she might have misunderstood Livia's intentions. In an instant, Livia's bittersweet smile vanished, her gaze locking intensely with Vanessa's. "Do you like the gentleman?" Lillian Li looked at Livia with surprise, then glanced anxiously at Vanessa, her heart pounding inexplicably. Before Vanessa could respond, Livia delicately picked up another pastry, scrutinizing it with a sharp, almost resentful gaze. "The gentleman is indeed erudite, but," Livia paused, then lifted her chin proudly, her eyes resolute. "My future status will not be limited to the Grand Preceptor's daughter. Despite past mistakes, my destiny remains unchanged. I believe your path will be similar, so I must warn you, don't get attached to what doesn't belong to you. There are some things best left unsaid, lest they be used against you." Leaving Livia's quarters, Vanessa's mind echoed with her words. After much contemplation, she still couldn't grasp Livia's intent. What misunderstanding had she caused? Vanessa recognized Livia's affection for their lord. Could Livia have mistaken her for harboring similar feelings? Did Livia, with her keen awareness of their future helplessness against fate, offer this advice out of genuine concern? At midnight, Vanessa awoke parched, her body uncomfortable, mind hazy, yet feeling a hollow yearning she couldn't articulate. Chapter 20, Too late, no time left. She intended to call Lillian Li for water, but several attempts left her unable to rise, her limbs weak. Lillian Li, Vanessa struggled to prop herself up, calling out, but her own voice startled her. Beyond a slight hoarseness, it held a bone-deep softness, unlike her usual girlish tone. Lillian Li, apparently in a deep sleep, only stirred after repeated calls. A lamp was quickly lit, and upon seeing Vanessa's flushed face, Lillian Li nearly dropped it. Miss, what's wrong? Don't worry. Vanessa couldn't control her trembling body, a captivating blush spreading over her skin. By now, she understood what was happening. Miss, you're burning up. I'll get a physician. Wait for me. Lillian Li turned to leave. Wait. Vanessa called out, maintaining composure before Lillian Li. Quietly find fourth brother. Tell him to find a trustworthy physician. Remember, tell no one else about my condition, only fourth brother. Understand? Lillian Li trembled, nodding, then hurried out, making her way to Nicholas Taylor's quarters. In the pitch-black night, Lillian Li stumbled several times, biting back pain to avoid alerting the night watch. Nearing Nicholas Taylor's quarters, her haste led her to collide with someone, causing her to clap a hand over her mouth in fright. Lillian Li. Nicholas Taylor looked at her in surprise. What are you doing out so late? Fourth master. Hearing the familiar voice, Lillian Li scrambled up, clutching his hand. It's really you. Seeing Lillian Li's tearful relief, Nicholas Taylor blinked. Her expression mirrored the girls at the pleasure garden when they saw him. For a moment, he was disoriented. Hadn't he returned to Taylor Manor? Fourth master, don't just stand there. Come with me. Lillian Li pulled at his hand, turning back. Nicholas Taylor, caught off guard, nearly stumbled. Wait. Lillian Li, this is inappropriate at this hour. People will talk. Just tell me what's wrong. Glancing around nervously, Lillian Li said, It's Miss. She's not well. Fourth master, come quickly. Oh, and we need a physician. Nicholas Taylor's playful demeanor vanished, his dark eyes turning serious. How serious is it? Lillian Li, flustered and unsure what to say, urgently wanted to take Vanessa back. All right, Nicholas Taylor glanced towards a specific area within the estate. You go back and look after her first. I'll be there shortly. As soon as he finished speaking, a commotion erupted in the previously quiet night. Lights quickly multiplied, spreading from the courtyard. Nicholas Taylor had just looked at towards Pure Heart Pavilion, as if meticulously planned. Miss. What should we do? Fourth master. Lillian Li was near tears, worried about the gossip that would spread if someone saw Vanessa in such a state. There's no time. Nicholas Taylor's eyes darkened. Chapter 21, Let me go, help. Without hesitation, Nicholas Taylor vanished into the shadows, instructing Lillian Li to improvise as needed. Arriving outside Vanessa's room, Nicholas Taylor heard the crash of breaking objects, followed by Vanessa's terrified struggles. You, let me go. Let go. Help. Nicholas Taylor kicked the door open. A burly man pinned Vanessa down on the bed, her clothes torn. The man's gaze, fixated on her exposed skin, held a crazed intensity, as if he wanted to rip away her remaining undergarments. Hearing the noise, Vanessa turned her head. Seeing Nicholas Taylor, her panicked heart miraculously calmed. Fourth brother. The burly man noticed Nicholas Taylor but remained unfazed. His task would be complete once the others outside stormed in. Noting the man's cold smirk, Nicholas Taylor knew time was short and advanced towards the bed without hesitation. The man sneered, releasing Vanessa to face Nicholas Taylor. His face was concealed by black cloth, save for his eyes that gleamed with cunning amusement. He seemed prepared for a deadly confrontation. Before the man could react, Nicholas Taylor moved with supernatural speed, snapping the man's neck with a swift, decisive blow. Death came before surprise. Vanessa, witnessing such martial skill for the first time, watched the man's body crumple to the floor. Fourth brother. Vanessa was drenched in cold sweat, yet burning up, her rationality on the verge of collapse. Nicholas Taylor frowned, rushing to her side. He removed a blood-soaked shard of glass from her palm, then retrieved a vial from his chest, giving her its contents to drink. His voice was icy. This will temporarily suppress the toxin. No matter what happens, stay here. Be good. He tucked Vanessa back under the covers, completely concealing her with the bed curtains. Before Nicholas Taylor could clear the debris, servants burst in. The thief must have entered Pure Heart Pavilion. I saw him. Quickly, search everywhere. Violet Carter's anxious face followed. Quickly, see if Fifth Miss is all right. The rest of you search carefully, don't let the thief escape. Nicholas Taylor's star-bright eyes blinked, his smile as harmless as it could be. Violet Carter and her torch-bearing entourage burst into Vanessa's room, stunned into speechless surprise at the sight of Nicholas Taylor sitting by the table. Violet Carter, especially, clenched her hands beneath her sleeves, her face paling as she saw a man's head beneath Nicholas Taylor's foot. Second sister-in-law, are you here to catch a thief? Nicholas Taylor asked feigningly, then continued without waiting for a reply, I've dealt with the thief. He had nothing on him, I checked. Everyone can go back to sleep. Violet Carter gave a strained smile, how coincidental. Speaking of this hour, why are you here? She glanced towards the bed. I took a shortcut over the wall, intending to ask little sister for some water. Unexpectedly, I ran into a thief and caught him. He panicked and accidentally killed himself by hitting his head, Nicholas Taylor explained casually. Is that so? Violet Carter wasn't easily dissuaded. Where's little sister? Is she all right? Wasn't she frightened? Why don't I see her? As she spoke, she reached for the bed curtains. She's still asleep. Nicholas Taylor gripped her hand, applying just enough pressure to make her sweat. We should take advantage of her being asleep, second sister-in-law. Shouldn't we leave? Violet Carter gritted her teeth against the pane, her face contorting slightly. Since we're here, it's better to check. If she's truly fine, how could she not wake with such a commotion? Miss took a sleeping draught before bed. Lillian Lee entered from the doorway, her expression fearless. I see. Violet Carter withdrew her hand, feigning understanding. The thief has been dealt with, it was just a false alarm. Then, everyone, let's go. But fourth brother, it's late, isn't it inappropriate to be in fifth sister's room like this? Without waiting for a response, Violet Carter departed. Nicholas Taylor was somewhat surprised by her reaction, she seemed even more certain of her victory. Once Violet Carter had truly left, he swiftly retrieved Vanessa from beneath the covers. Her condition had deteriorated rapidly, she was on the verge of coma, her breathing faint. Vanessa! Vanessa! Wake up! Nicholas Taylor's brow furrowed deeply. Lillian Lee couldn't help but cry, how could this be? What happened to Miss? Nicholas Taylor ripped down the bed curtains, wrapped Vanessa's body in them, and sprinted from the room. In the deserted library, Nicholas Taylor discarded his pretense, using his internal energy to force the toxins from Vanessa's body. Vanessa! Wake up! Nicholas Taylor lifted her face, his expression darkening at the sight of the longing and vulnerability upon it. I feel terrible, so terrible, Vanessa moaned, clinging to him, her fingers tearing at her clothes in anguish. Vanessa! Nicholas Taylor stammered, hastily attempting to cover her. Exposed skin. Vanessa Taylor. Nicholas Taylor, losing his composure, pushed her away. During their struggle, they bumped into something, and the wall where a painting hung suddenly opened. Before Nicholas Taylor could react, they tumbled together into a hidden chamber. Without a moment's hesitation, Nicholas Taylor struck Vanessa, rendering her unconscious. He then gently lifted her, carefully channeling his internal energy into her body until she expelled a mouthful of black blood. Only then did he withdraw his hands. Vanessa finally felt some relief. She vaguely sensed being carried to a soft bed and given something bitter to drink. As her consciousness drifted, she heard someone say her life was saved, but there would be consequences. Consequences. Vanessa frowned. What had happened to her? She struggled to understand what had transpired, but exhaustion quickly pulled her back into slumber. Henry Owen withdrew his hand from Vanessa's wrist and slowly rose. Noticing Nicholas Taylor's grim expression, he watched as Nicholas strode towards Lillian Lee. "Did Vanessa see my second sister-in-law today?" he demanded. Lillian Lee, perched anxiously by Vanessa's bedside, shook her head in confusion. "No, today, Miss Vanessa only went to the academy and then to 3rd Miss Livia's courtyard." Chapter 22, More Than Meets the Eye. Livia. Nicholas Taylor and Henry Owen exchanged glances. "Yes, 3rd Miss asked Miss Vanessa to visit, have some refreshments, and, she said some strange things." Lillian Lee trailed off, a flicker of worry in her eyes. Could the Miss's condition be related to 3rd Miss? Nicholas Taylor let out a cold snort. "I didn't expect her to resort to such schemes. 4th Master, could it really be 3rd Miss?" "Lillian Lee, I will handle this. I won't let them get away with it this time." Nicholas Taylor offered a reassuring smile, but Lillian Lee couldn't shake the chilling darkness in his eyes. "Miss Vanessa and 3rd Miss have no quarrel. Why would she do such a thing?" Lillian Lee's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear. "It's not as simple as you think." Nicholas Taylor's anger subsided, and he patted Lillian Lee's hand with a faint smile. "Take care of Vanessa. Don't worry about anything else. Dispose of these clothes. I'll stay here and watch over her." Lillian Lee, her mind reeling with confusion, obediently gathered Vanessa's discarded garments. Suddenly, something clattered to the floor. "Wait!" Henry Owen stopped Lillian Lee from picking it up. He carefully retrieved the object, using a piece of clothing as a barrier, and brought it to his nose, sniffing delicately. "Is there a problem?" Nicholas Taylor's gaze sharpened. Henry Owen shook his head. "Old Madam gave this to Miss Vanessa. She lost it a while ago. Thankfully, 3rd Miss found it and returned it to us when we got back. I've kept it by Miss Vanessa's bedside ever since," Lillian Lee explained hesitantly. At her words, Henry Owen glanced around the room, then dropped the hairpin into a bowl of clear water. The water, once pristine, slowly turned a murky green. What is this?" Lillian Lee thought her eyes were deceiving her. As expected. Henry Owen's elegant brows furrowed in a gloomy frown. "There were rumors about this drug before, I didn't expect it to be true. It was the 3rd Miss who harmed Miss." Lillian Lee gritted her teeth, her voice filled with indignation. Then, anxiety washed over her. "Oh no, Miss also ate the pastries there. When we entered, the 3rd Miss had a very strange scent on her. Could there be other poisons?" Hearing this, Nicholas Taylor looked towards Henry Owen. Henry Owen shook his head at him, and only then did Nicholas completely relax. "It seems Livia was completely used as a scapegoat. Indeed, she doesn't yet have the ability to obtain these things. They really spared no expense, going to such lengths to deal with a young girl. I wonder what they'll use to entertain me when the time comes." A smirk played on Nicholas Taylor's lips, his arrogance radiating outwards. "It seems I should also limber up a bit. Do you really want to do this?" Henry Owen's tone was calm, but his disapproval was evident. "After today's commotion, my true strength will be revealed sooner or later. It's better to disrupt her plans before she makes a move." Nicholas Taylor's peach blossom eyes held an intensity that was hard to meet. "Please take care of Vanessa these next few days, brother. Don't let anything happen to her." With that, he vanished into the night, disappearing completely from the room. Vanessa lay in bed for a day and a night before finally regaining consciousness. A strange discomfort lingered in her body, and the room was filled with the scent of herbs. Lillian Lee was not there, and Vanessa wanted to get up to pour herself some water. Awake? Nicholas Taylor sat by Vanessa's bedside, holding a cup of tea. Brother, Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. Seeing that it was Nicholas Taylor. Her expression softened, and she spoke with exasperation. I really suspect you're not human. Only you have this habit of appearing in the middle of the night and scaring people. I might not have been poisoned to death, but I could very well be scared to death by you. Nicholas Taylor's lips twitched. His eyes were slightly red, and he looked tired, but his clothes were clean and free of dust, even carrying a faint feminine scent. Vanessa snorted, took the cup of water, and drank it all in one go. She unceremoniously placed the cup back in Nicholas Taylor's hand and stated firmly, "It was Violet Carter playing tricks again, wasn't it?" Nicholas Taylor shrugged, placing the cup on the table. I thought you would say Livia. Her. Vanessa leaned back against the pillows, shaking her head slightly. Even if all the evidence points to her, I don't believe it was her. Vanessa, you're truly clever, Nicholas Taylor said, reaching out to ruffle her hair. Vanessa glared at him, but as she looked into his eyes, a sense of awkwardness washed over her. She felt like something shouldn't have happened between them, but she couldn't remember anything after waking up. Nicholas Taylor awkwardly withdrew his hand, hiding the embarrassment in his eyes before resuming his usual carefree demeanor. You're right. Violet Carter did indeed try to manipulate Livia into taking you down, but Livia refused. However, Violet was angry that you had been spreading her secrets, so she sought you out to vent her anger. A secret? Nicholas Taylor scoffed, of course you've forgotten, and you can't speak of it. There's only one explanation, Violet Carter also knows about Livia's affair. She must have used it to goad Livia into taking the blame. It's a rather amusing secret, do tell. Livia, to hide her lack of needlework skills, secretly bought finished pieces and passed them off as her own. What do you think? Nicholas Taylor clearly couldn't fathom it. What aftereffects will I have? Vanessa suddenly asked. Ahem, Nicholas Taylor covered his mouth with the back of his hand, coughed twice, and said casually, it's nothing serious, really. You'll understand when you're older. Vanessa stared at Nicholas Taylor, but no matter how she looked at him, he just kept grinning, saying nothing more. Vanessa mused, it seems like there should be some reciprocity. Just then, the chirping of insects drifted in from outside the window. Nicholas Taylor quietly stood up. Get some good rest. You won't be seeing her again for a while. He gestured towards the stack of books on the table. Stay in the courtyard and recuperate these next few days. Don't go anywhere. If you're bored, read these. I have some business to attend to. Before Vanessa could reply, Nicholas Taylor vanished, leaving her alone in the room. Having slept for so long, she wasn't sleepy at all. Vanessa got up, sat down in a chair, and looked through the stack of books Nicholas Taylor had brought. Strangely, they were all medical texts. In her past life, she had a natural affinity for medicine. Unexpectedly, even here, she was still drawn to the healing arts. Was this fate? She hated Nina Thompson, but not the fact that she inherited the clinic. She knew it was Taylor Van's life's work, and Nina Thompson had the means to carry on its legacy. Although she hadn't been a dedicated student before, she couldn't deny that she didn't actually dislike studying medicine. Perhaps that was why fate had given her this chance to reconnect with something she wasn't entirely unfamiliar with. Chapter 23, Exiled. Too lenient for her. The stack of books didn't look new, they had a musty smell. Her attention was soon caught by a tattered medical book titled, Chronicles of 1,000 Poisons. More accurately, it wasn't a textbook, but a handwritten journal. The journal even had a cadaverous odor. It wasn't thick, the paper unusually thin. The entries were somewhat disorganized and even included anatomical drawings of the human body. Fortunately, the handwriting was legible, making it not too difficult to read. The sections on poisons were incredibly detailed. Vanessa's skin crawled as she looked at the bizarre entries. They were truly grotesque and insidious. Nearly every poison described was fatal, and the deaths were gruesome. So far, Vanessa hadn't been able to connect her own poisoning symptoms to any of the entries in this medical journal. She didn't even seem to know what kind of poison she'd been afflicted with. Come to think of it, neither Nicholas Taylor nor Henry Owen had ever told her. She'd intended to ask Nicholas Taylor where he'd found these books, but she hadn't seen him for days. Vanessa waited until late at night, but Nicholas Taylor, unlike before, didn't sneak into her courtyard looking for food. Even Henry Owen seemed quite busy, ostensibly tutoring the children, but who knew what he was truly occupied with. After 2 days, Vanessa felt significantly better. Growing tired of her room, she went to sit under the shade of a tree in the courtyard. From afar, she could hear Violet Carter berating the servants. Someone had clearly promised her a lesson, yet 2 days had passed and not only was Violet Carter unscathed, she was even more unrestrained than before, especially after learning that Vanessa was still alive. The news had turned her face livid. Vanessa simply ignored her. When she felt up to it, she read, otherwise, she shut herself in her room and slept. On the midnight of the 3rd day, the barometric pressure dropped unusually low, the air thick and stifling. Vanessa woke abruptly, her mind strangely clear. She wasn't sure how long she'd been awake before drifting back into a hazy sleep. Miss, Lillian Lee called loudly from outside, rushing to Vanessa's side like a gust of wind before the chill of dawn had a chance to settle. Vanessa frowned slightly, opening her eyes to glance at the flustered Lillian Lee, whose face alternated between pale and green, like a spoiled oil painting. Miss, early this morning, news came from the palace that Empress Moro has been deposed. The Moro Chancellor's estate has been confiscated, and His Majesty has ordered the execution of several of Chancellor Moro's favored disciples, including young Master Richard Carter of the Chu family. Many officials previously close to Empress Moro have also been implicated, and... Vanessa sat up, her voice utterly flat. Lillian Lee, startled by Vanessa's calmness, stared blankly for a moment before continuing anxiously, this time, second young madam's maternal family has been implicated. Everyone in the Chu family, young and old, has been exiled to the border. Miss, the Chu family and ours are closely connected. Do you think our estate will be implicated? Will we be exiled too? Are you looking forward to it? Vanessa rose, picking up her clothes and beginning to dress herself. Lillian Lee shook her head vehemently. How could I? Of course, I hope nothing happens to the Grand Tutor's estate. It's just, this matter is causing such a stir throughout the capital. It probably won't die down easily. It's very likely that the more Lillian Lee thought about it, the more frightened she became. Her hands trembled, and she couldn't finish her sentence. Still consumed by fear, she forgot to assist Vanessa with her morning ablutions. Vanessa didn't call for her either. After dressing, she sat before her vanity table and began to brush her long, thick hair. Nicholas Taylor had truly acted generously. Just for a couple of chicken thieves, he'd pulled down the Empress. Richard Carter was dead, and with so many others accompanying him in death, he'd died quite gloriously. Empress Moro's power had seemed to be at its zenith, yet it had been so easily destroyed. Was the Moro clan merely gilded on the outside and rotten within, or had the emperor been playing the fool all along, waiting for just such an opportunity? What role had Nicholas Taylor truly played in all of this? Vanessa had no interest in court affairs. Her current good mood stemmed solely from Richard Carter's death. Violet Carter must be heartbroken, mustn't she? Exiled to the frontier with the Chu family? Isn't that too lenient for her? Vanessa pondered, attempting a simple hairstyle, but her sleek, dark hair refused to cooperate. Her arms ached, the coiffure still a mess, so she finally stopped, exasperated, and summoned Lillian Li. Lillian Li, seemingly preoccupied with the exile, appeared dazed and listless, managing to style Vanessa's hair with what seemed like her last ounce of strength. After breakfast, Vanessa stepped out, noticing the unusually fresh air. She hadn't gone far when she heard Violet Carter's wails, demanding to see old Tudor Taylor. She clearly wanted him to intercede for the Chu family, but with even the Empress and Prime Minister deposed, the Emperor's fury was evident. Who would dare provoke him? Sure enough, the Grand Tutor in the study did not see Violet Carter at all. She did not give up easily. She just knelt right in front of the study door. No matter how others tried to persuade her, she refused to get up. The sun climbed higher, scorching the earth, and soon Violet Carter swayed precariously. Vanessa was surprised Violet Carter hadn't done something reckless in her grief. She expected her to rush to Richard Carter's side upon hearing of his death. Had she still been entangled with Richard Carter, she'd be dead several times over, either by the Emperor's men or old Tudor Taylor's hand. Fortunately, she retained some sense, pleading only for the Chu family. With such dramatic weeping, Vanessa naturally had to observe. In a few days, such a display wouldn't be possible. By the time Vanessa reached the study, the courtyard was crowded. Mrs. Taylor, frowning, leaned on Livia for support, while Ronan Taylor restrained Violet Carter, fearing a rash act. A heavy, oppressive atmosphere hung in the air. Like a chilling frost. Seeing Vanessa, Violet Carter abruptly stopped crying, her swollen eyes fixed on her with burning resentment. She shoved Ronan Taylor aside and lunged, "Vanessa Taylor, you'll die a dog's death. I'll kill you, kill you." Vanessa stared, aghast, momentarily paralyzed. Ronan Taylor pulled back the near-frenzied Violet Carter, but her curses continued. "It was you, it must have been you. Otherwise, why would my cousin be dead?" Vanessa Taylor, sheltered behind Lillian Li, trembled, appearing frightened, but she was actually stifling laughter. Violet Carter, still uncontrolled, mentioned only Richard Carter before everyone, despite her own parents' imprisonment. #### Chapter 24, Laughable, she's even more cruel. I thought she'd accepted the consequences when plotting against me, but she's surprisingly weak. Watching Violet Carter, still trying to grab her even from the ground, Vanessa shook her head inwardly, then spoke, her voice trembling, "Second sister-in-law, I truly don't understand what you mean. I only heard of the Chu family's misfortune and came to offer condolences. Besides, everyone knows I'm just a young girl. How could I possibly have harmed your cousin? Don't play dumb, you don't have the guts for this, Nicholas Taylor does. He's long held a grudge against my cousin, and this time he struck directly. How could you be so heartless, wanting my Chu family exiled as well?" Violet Carter sobbed, her eyes darting around. Not long ago, she lost her daughter, and now, her lover is dead too. It's truly a great test of her sanity. Impudent. Just as everyone was shocked by Violet Carter's accusations, the closed study suddenly opened, and Royal Tudor Taylor glared furiously at Violet Carter, roaring, "Empress Moro has caused chaos in the harem, repeatedly disobeyed orders, and the Prime Minister has abused his power, formed cliques, and accepted bribes. The evidence is clear. What does any of this have to do with the Taylor estate? If your mind isn't clear, don't come out, go back and rest." Violet Carter was terrified, her face pale, her whole body trembling uncontrollably, like the last leaf on a dry autumn tree, ready to fall at any moment. Vanessa saw Royal Tudor Taylor this angry for the first time, his gaze sharp as a knife cutting into Violet Carter's flesh, murderous. Scolded like this, Violet Carter calmed down, understanding how foolish she had just been. She was so focused on accusing Nicholas Taylor and Vanessa that she hadn't realized she was pushing the Taylor estate into the eye of the storm. If exploited by someone with ulterior motives, the Taylor estate would also face deadly peril. Currently, the Taylor estate is safe, and Violet Carter is still protected. If something were to happen to the Taylor estate, she wouldn't survive either. Mrs. Taylor hurriedly signaled to Taylor Jingyu, telling him to take Violet Carter back. Ronan Taylor, kind-hearted as ever, didn't suspect Violet Carter in the slightest. Besides heartache, he only felt heartache. Vanessa watched as Ronan Taylor led Violet Carter away, her figure somewhat disheveled, her panicked eyes carrying a trace of dullness, her soul lost and adrift. Mrs. Taylor came over and patted Vanessa's hand, also frowning. "Daughter, if there's nothing important, just stay in your chambers these days and don't wander around. As for what you just heard, just pretend you didn't hear anything, understand?" Vanessa obediently nodded, then watched as Livia helped Mrs. Taylor into the study. Before entering the study, Livia turned her head to look at Vanessa, a strange smile seemingly playing on her beautiful face. Vanessa paid no attention and returned directly to her courtyard. Just as she sat down, Nicholas Taylor appeared out of nowhere, plopping down beside her. "Lillian Lee, pour me a cup of water, quick, I'm dying of thirst." Lillian Lee hurriedly nodded, and Nicholas Taylor drank 2 large cups of water in one go before letting out a breath. Vanessa sipped her tea, calmly observing Nicholas Taylor. She noticed that the clothes he usually wore with such carefree elegance were now wrinkled. Although he wasn't exactly disheveled, the exhaustion on his face was evident. Especially his bloodshot eyes, clearly lacking their usual sparkle. Before Vanessa could reconcile this image with his usual composure, Nicholas Taylor flashed a suggestive smile, giving her a flirtatious glance. "Has my little Vanessa missed me while I've been gone these past few days?" Lillian Lee's face flushed crimson, while Vanessa remained calm, her expression unchanged. Seeing Vanessa's lack of reaction, Nicholas Taylor scooted closer to her. "Ah, are you angry? I've been worked to death these past few days. I really didn't mean to neglect my little Vanessa." Little Vanessa repeated, making Vanessa's skin crawl. "Wipe that disgusting smile off your face, you look like a bluebottle." Nicholas Taylor's smile froze, a look of defeat flashing across his face, but he quickly recovered, grinning as if nothing had happened. "Vanessa, don't be angry, your 4th brother brought you a gift." As he spoke, he pulled an exquisite hairpin from his sleeve, its blue pendant gleaming in the sunlight. "What's that smell?" Vanessa asked abruptly, setting down her teacup. Lillian Lee sniffed around, puzzled. "Miss, there's no smell." Nicholas Taylor dangled the hairpin in front of Vanessa. "Don't you like it?" Vanessa stared at the hairpin, a bright smile on her face. "Smell it, it has a floral scent." Nicholas Taylor's hand paused, his brows furrowing almost imperceptibly, a sharp glint appearing in his eyes. "Why can't I smell it?" "You're always hanging around flower gardens, of course you can't smell it." Vanessa scoffed. "Tell me, whose trinket is this that you're trying to appease me with?" Nicholas Taylor's smile deepened. "Your 4th brother has been doing proper business these past few days, not loitering in any flower gardens." "Little Vanessa, you shouldn't have such wicked thoughts for a girl." "Little girl? Wicked?" If she told Nicholas Taylor about Master Kong Kong's glorious career, would he burst a blood vessel? Vanessa couldn't help but shake her head and smile wryly. Back then, the women in the dormitory at Taylor Academy had become acquainted with some of the men the boys often talked about, and Vanessa hadn't deliberately refused. She thought that sooner or later she would be Nathan Brock's wife, and after being enlightened, she would definitely make Nathan Brock love her even more. Unexpectedly, things didn't go as she wished. "Vanessa, what are you spacing out for?" Nicholas Taylor waved his hand in front of her face. "I bought this for you with real money. I guarantee it's the only one in the world, one of a kind." Vanessa took the hairpin, clutching it tightly in her hand. She had once thought she would be the only one for Nathan Brock, but in the end, only hatred remained. After a long while, Vanessa somberly expressed her gratitude, thankful that there were still people in this world who treated her so well. However, in this lifetime, her heart would never waver again. Nicholas Taylor naturally reached out and ruffled Vanessa's hair, then stretched and stood up, yawning as he spoke. "I'm so sleepy, I'm going to catch up on some sleep. What kind of poison did I get before?" Vanessa stared intently. Nicholas Taylor stumbled, nearly tripping over the threshold. After a moment, he chuckled. "It's a beautiful day, don't think about those things anymore. If you have time, go to sleep, you might even grow taller." Vanessa glanced at him, the excuse was truly awful. "Where did you find those medical techniques? Why do the things you bring always have a strange smell?" Nicholas Taylor raised an eyebrow, speaking with a hint of pride. "My nose is keen." Speaking of this skill. Nicholas Taylor trailed off mid-sentence, then turned back, sitting down beside Vanessa, continuing to overuse his charming eyes. "You know your fourth brother has seen countless beauties. Over time, I've developed the ability to smell and identify people. I don't need to see them, just a sniff and I know who's a withered fruit and who's a breathtaking beauty." Chapter 25, Deservedly, Retribution is Imminent. Vanessa hardly believed her brother's words, lowering her head to intently examine the hairpin in her hand. Initially, it seemed ordinary, but the more she looked, the more intriguing the jade became. Noticing Vanessa's lack of attention, Nicholas Taylor cleared his throat and sternly asked, "Have you read the Thousand Poisons Manual?" Vanessa nodded. This scripture is an absolute medical treasure, once fought over by physicians. Even now, many still covet it. Little Vanessa, you must keep it safe and hidden. If others learn of it, both you and the book will be snatched away. Nicholas Taylor winked as he spoke, his peach blossom eyes practically sparking with electricity. Vanessa wasn't surprised by this information, but she was puzzled. Why would Nicholas Taylor so casually give her such a valuable medical text? It seemed he wouldn't have mentioned any of this if she hadn't asked. "Vanessa, with your keen nose, you must have noticed the unusual scent of this book. I dug it out from the chest of a rotting skeleton, right in the secret chamber of our library. If I'm not mistaken, those bones belong to Thousand Poisons, the author of the Thousand Poisons Manual. Yet, rumors claimed he and his lover had retreated to a secluded paradise. To think he died in our secret chamber. Perhaps the rumors were false." Nicholas Taylor was clearly perplexed. Hearing this story, Vanessa felt a newfound reverence for the medical text. Deep down, she'd always felt a strong connection to it, a sense of familiarity from the moment she saw it. Pouring himself another cup of water, Nicholas Taylor muttered, "Thankfully, no one knows Thousand Poisons died in our mansion. Otherwise, we'd be overrun with thieves. Thousand Poisons, such a peculiar name. Only someone so unique could write such an extraordinary book." Her curiosity about this Thousand Poisons intensified. Lillian Lee, entering with refreshments, bumped into Nicholas Taylor rushing out. "Fourth Master, where are you going in such a hurry?" she instinctively asked. "To the lavatory." Nicholas Taylor replied without looking up. Lillian Lee's face flushed crimson, her head bowing almost to the floor. That night, Violet Carter awoke from a hazy dream to see Richard Carter. Without a second thought, she jumped up and chased his shadow out the door. When her mind cleared, she found herself in the kitchen, embracing a crude servant. Before she could even dress, Ronan Taylor appeared, glaring at her, a candlestick snapping in two in his hand. Violet Carter shrieked and rushed to Ronan Taylor, tearfully explaining herself. But having witnessed the scene, the usually gentle Ronan Taylor fiercely slapped her. Violet Carter fainted. However, Ronan Taylor, out of respect for their past, didn't expel her. Instead, he dismissed the servants who knew of the incident, claiming Violet Carter needed rest, and sent her to a secluded villa. Violet Carter's erratic behavior upon waking, a descent into madness, provided ample justification for her dismissal. Vanessa learned of this the next morning from Lillian Lee, who even mimicked Violet Carter's deranged demeanor. Vanessa listened, saying nothing. Like a summer storm, the incident quickly faded, and everyone seemed to forget Violet Carter's existence. During subsequent meals, everyone tacitly avoided mentioning Violet Carter. Ronan Taylor grew more withdrawn and noticeably thinner, the unspoken shock weighing heavily upon him. Although Vanessa didn't question Nicholas Taylor about Violet Carter, she understood his role in her swift and complete erasure. Neither Vanessa nor Nicholas Taylor spoke of it. Violet Carter and Richard Carter had vanished from their lives. Summer passed, and autumn's presence deepened. The court's prior turmoil subsided, and the Tian-Chi kingdom, save for the absence of a queen, continued as if unchanged. Since encountering the Thousand Poisons record, Vanessa devoted her free time to medicine, amassing a collection of related texts. Ironically, after years of academic indifference in the modern world, she now immersed herself in ancient medical texts. If Taylor Yun knew, he'd be astonished. This world held unfamiliar terminology in medicinal names, often defying even extensive research. Initially, Vanessa consulted Nicholas Taylor, but quickly realized his ignorance in these matters. Henry Owen proved far more knowledgeable, clarifying her uncertainties. Vanessa increasingly sought Henry Owen's guidance. He, in turn, answered her queries without prying, their discreet exchanges shielded by the guise of private tutoring. One afternoon, weary from studying, Vanessa sought fresh air in the courtyard. She settled on a swing, gently swaying as crimson maple leaves drifted down. She picked up a leaf, tracing its veins in the sunlight. The azure sky, vibrant leaves, and bright sun, though beautiful, evoked an unexpected pang of sadness. During freshman year, the week before midterms, Lily Taylor, resistant to studying, pleaded with Nathan Brock to take her to a movie. Nathan, aware of her heavy workload, insisted she prioritize her studies. After lunch, strolling beneath the campus trees, Lily Taylor persisted. Exasperated, Nathan Brock offered a compromise. If she found 2 maple leaves with identical veins within half an hour, he'd concede. Overjoyed, Lily Taylor excitedly gripped his hand, repeatedly seeking confirmation. Nathan Brock, watching her childlike delight, reluctantly agreed. Without a word, Lily Taylor agreed, running towards the base of the maple tree, glancing back to tell Nathan Brock that if he couldn't find her, he'd not only have to take her to the movies, but also to dinner. Nathan Brock stood beneath the sunlight, nodding indulgently. Then, Lily Taylor bent down, meticulously examining each fallen maple leaf. She was utterly serious, though aware that no 2 leaves are ever truly identical, she stubbornly clung to the hope of finding a matching pair. Chapter 26, Your Recklessness, My Burden. While searching, she occasionally checked on Nathan Brock's position, worried he might abandon her. Nathan Brock remained, watching her from afar, understanding Lily Taylor's nature, knowing the dry medical texts were stifling her, and realizing that the leaf hunt was a way for her to unwind. Unexpectedly, Lily Taylor searched for a half hour, still insistent that with another half hour, she'd surely find 2 identical leaves. Surprisingly, she continued until dusk, still empty-handed, her legs trembling with exhaustion, her back aching, even walking upright becoming a struggle. Yet, that night, she slept soundly, dreaming of Nathan Brock taking her to the movies, even thoughtfully buying her popcorn. If life is truly fleeting, why does longing linger so? Nicholas Taylor perched on a wall, a wine jug in hand, convincingly playing the part of a heartbroken drunk. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat at his words, the maple leaf she held fluttering to the ground. With a swirl of his robes, Nicholas Taylor settled onto the stone bench before Vanessa, sighing between sips of wine. Witnessing his theatrics, Vanessa's mood soured, her face expressionless. She rose from the swing and walked past him into the house. Vanessa, my 4th brother just arrived, why are you leaving? Nicholas Taylor caught her hand, his eyes filled with a wounded look. Vanessa yanked her hand free, turning to face him with a sardonic half-smile. Who says you can't cut it off? Even a dull pair of scissors, with a bit of force, could sever that of yours. Nicholas Taylor jumped as if startled, instinctively shielding his groin, his handsome face flushing crimson. Little Vanessa, you, you're a girl, how can you be so cruel? Vanessa's smile deepened. A physician's compassion compels me, I couldn't bear to see you suffer so. Nicholas Taylor straightened, staring at Vanessa as if she were a monster. Was I wrong to show you those medical texts? It hasn't been long, and you've become so unlovable. Vanessa glanced at him, then turned and walked away. Nicholas Taylor quickly followed, catching her hand again, and said with a smile, autumn's here, tempers flare easily. Come, fourth brother will take you out for a stroll, to relax. You're the one with the flared temper. If you need to relax, taking me along seems inappropriate. You'd have me witness your performance, and those other young ladies wouldn't approve. Despite her words, Vanessa allowed Nicholas Taylor to lead her outside. Having learned his lesson, Nicholas Taylor was somewhat immune to Vanessa's words, yet he still couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. If Vanessa were a man, uttering these words, Nicholas Taylor would absolutely consider her a brother, and furthermore, might even boast about his own flower-viewing experiences, but Vanessa was his younger sister, and moreover, a young girl, so some things simply couldn't be spoken. With her forceful personality, Nicholas Taylor wondered what young lord could possibly handle her, shaking his head in resignation. Vanessa was just about to speak when she felt her waist tighten, her whole body leaping into the air with Nicholas Taylor before landing lightly outside the wall. Before she could regain her senses, Nicholas Taylor pulled her onto the street, shoved her into a tailor shop, tossed her a set of men's clothing, dragged her into a room, then slammed the door shut. Soon, Vanessa heard him chatting and laughing with other young women. A dog can't change its habit of eating shit. Vanessa thought angrily, suddenly feeling a surge of dislike for her small body. If she were Lily Taylor, how could Nicholas Taylor drag her around like this? Having finally managed to dress herself, Vanessa reluctantly appeared before Nicholas Taylor. Already petite, the men's clothing made her look even more undernourished, but with her hair tied up, she gained a touch of handsomeness. Look at you, haven't eaten enough, have you? Come, fourth brother will take you to get some good food. Saying this, he grabbed Vanessa's hair and pulled her out. I can walk myself, let me go. Vanessa struggled, but the more she struggled, the tighter Nicholas Taylor held on, until she finally gave up. The two walked along the bustling streets without any other mode of transportation. It was Vanessa's first time out of the mansion since arriving, and she was curious about the unfamiliar sights. The streets were lively and bustling, filled with vendors selling unfamiliar goods and strangely shaped snacks. Nicholas Taylor deliberately slowed his pace, strolling leisurely behind Vanessa, allowing her to look around. Although he said he was buying food for Vanessa, he didn't seem to have any intention of taking her into any restaurants, instead buying various street snacks, each one surprisingly delicious, no less so than food from a proper establishment. Along the way, Vanessa ate her fill, until she could barely walk another step. Before she could speak, Nicholas Taylor somehow produced a horse, lifted her onto it, swung his long leg over the saddle, settled her in front of him, and then casually handed her a stick of maltose candy. Vanessa looked at the maltose candy in her hand, a little surprised and a little resigned. It seemed Nicholas Taylor really did treat her like a child, coaxing her with candy. Yet, this simple candy brought a touch of warmth to Vanessa's heart. Soon they left the bustling streets behind, Nicholas Taylor urging the horse out of the city, following the riverbank westward. While riding offered beautiful scenery and fresh air, after a while, Vanessa felt as though her bones were about to fall apart. As dusk approached, Vanessa was about to suggest turning back when she heard a commotion in the distance. Vanessa and Nicholas Taylor exchanged a glance, then quickly rode towards the sound. Upon witnessing the scene before her, Vanessa was genuinely startled. Several soldiers in uniform, carrying a few buckets of thin gruel into a makeshift tent, were instantly swarmed by a crowd of ragged, foul-smelling people. Before it could be distributed, the gruel in the buckets was snatched away. In truth, it couldn't even be called gruel, it was mostly water. Yet, those who managed to grab some cherished it like a treasure, fearful of spilling it or having it stolen. The people waiting for the gruel were of all ages, their clothes tattered, faces sallow, and lips cracked. When they saw the white gruel, their eyes lit up with intense longing. "Stop fighting. Get in line. Do you want to die, still daring to snatch?" A fierce soldier whipped a thin, elderly man with a leather lash. The wretched old man had struggled to reach the gruel bucket, only to find it empty. He merely intended to scoop up the remnants clinging to the sides, but the lash sent him tumbling to the ground. Vanessa frowned, her grip on the reins tightening until her knuckles were white. The old man lay gasping on the ground, his breath shallow and labored. Chapter 27, Misery and devastation everywhere. The soldier didn't even glance at the old man, continuing to brandish his lash at the crowd of refugees. "You lowlifes, if you want to eat, obey. What are you looking at? Look again and I'll gouge your eyes out." The soldier passed by a man who happened to look at him, promptly slapped him to the ground, and was about to kick him. Fortunately, others nearby intervened, stopping him. The soldier cursed and walked away, but after 2 steps, still feeling resentful, he overturned a bucket of gruel onto the ground. The people immediately scrambled, lying prostrate to lap up the gruel mixed with dirt. "Worse than animals. You don't eat properly but prefer to lick the ground like that. Fine, if you like licking, I'll let you lick your fill." He then dumped 2 more buckets of gruel onto the ground. Vanessa sensed Nicholas Taylor stiffen behind her, his breathing growing heavy. Before she could react, she felt the space behind her empty. Nicholas Taylor had dismounted. Before Nicholas Taylor could reach him, an old monk with white hair and beard went to the side of the beaten old man, helped him up, and guided him to sit down. The old monk assessed the old man's condition, knowing he was famished. The old monk intended to ask for a bowl of gruel, but the soldier shooed him away. Go away, you stinking monk, what are you crowding here for? Get out." The soldier lashed out at the monk, driving him away. The monk stumbled and nearly fell, but Nicholas Taylor quickly caught him. "Thank you, benefactor." The old monk thanked Nicholas Taylor, then used a broken bowl to scoop up some of the gruel water from the ground and offered it to the old man. Vanessa dismounted and stood silently observing for a while. She thought she would no longer be moved by anything, but witnessing this scene, her body reacted faster than her heart. She quickly went to their side, helped the old monk support the old man, and gave him some of the gruel water to drink. The broken bowl contained only a little thin gruel mixed with dirt and sand. Vanessa couldn't bear to watch, and was about to confront the soldiers when Nicholas Taylor stopped her, shaking his head, and strode towards them himself. Vanessa couldn't understand what he was saying to the soldiers, but he then pulled out a wad of banknotes and handed it to them. Their expressions immediately shifted, smiles and flattery replacing their prior sternness. Soon after, Nicholas Taylor returned with a bowl of plain white porridge. Vanessa managed to feed the old man a few spoonfuls, but he quickly vomited it all back up. It was likely due to his prolonged starvation, his stomach was too weak to handle anything. After much effort, she finally got him to swallow a little more. Vanessa realized her forehead was beaded with sweat. She hadn't seen clearly before, but now, up close, she could see people lying listlessly around the small roadside bushes. All of them were sick and weak, their eyes dull and lifeless. There were so many people, but so little porridge, it simply wasn't enough. Moreover, the weather was getting colder, and the refugees' clothing was thin, they certainly wouldn't be able to withstand the freezing nights. Winter was coming. If these people weren't properly sheltered, they would likely freeze to death in the fields. The thought weighed heavily on Vanessa's mind. Witnessing such genuine suffering for the first time, she felt a deep sense of oppression. Lost in thought, she suddenly heard a woman's shriek in the distance, followed by heart-wrenching sobs, "Xiao Bao, Xiao Bao. Don't scare mother. Wake up, wake up." Vanessa rushed towards the cries. Under a large tree, she saw a boy, about 5 or 6 years old, convulsing violently. His eyes rolled back, foam frothed at his mouth, and his body trembled uncontrollably. "What's happening?" Nicholas Taylor strode over and crouched down to examine the child. Vanessa's first thought was epilepsy, but upon closer inspection, it didn't quite seem like it. She also knelt beside the child, picking up a small piece of wood to put in his mouth. "Vanessa." Before Nicholas Taylor could stop her, Vanessa's hand reached out, ignoring the dirty foam, and inserted the wood between the boy's teeth to prevent him from biting his tongue. She then checked the boy's pupils and felt his forehead. As she reached to pull open his shirt, Nicholas Taylor caught her hand. "Vanessa." Vanessa looked up at Nicholas Taylor, understanding his concern. She moved her lips and shook her head. "It's all right." Continuing her examination, she asked the boy's mother, "Has he shown any unusual symptoms before?" The mother, still in shock, finally stammered, "He complained of a stomach ache earlier. I touched his forehead and it felt a bit cold. I thought it was just the weather." "What did he eat today?" Vanessa asked, instructing Nicholas Taylor to fetch some water as she turned the boy onto his side. The boy's mother watched as Vanessa's clean clothes became soiled. She remained silent, her eyes deep within her youthful face. Though young, she possessed a maturity beyond her years. "What did he eat?" Vanessa, not hearing a response, asked again. The mother shook her head with a bitter smile. "A few days ago, we boiled grass to eat, or foraged for wild berries. Now, with the cold, the grass is dead, and berries are scarce. Next, we'll have to resort to tree bark." Having said that, she anxiously looked at the child, her aged, sallow face awash with tears. Vanessa, without a moment to offer comfort, accepted the water bottle from Nicholas Taylor, helped the young boy up, and poured him a drink. Not long after, the child vomited again with a loud retch, this time expelling not only white foam but also small, red fragments. What is this?" The child's mother was clearly taken aback. Vanessa leaned in close to smell the vomit, then used a twig to separate the red bits, carefully examining them. Observing her actions, Nicholas Taylor, at a loss for words, simply stood by, assisting Vanessa. "Miss, what's wrong with my child?" The child's mother looked at Vanessa, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Vanessa glanced up at the mother, then noticed, as she looked back down, that her hair ribbon had fallen to the ground, her hair now loose. "It seems to be food poisoning. He's eaten something he shouldn't have." Vanessa didn't deny it, pouring the child more water. "Heavens!" The child's mother froze, her distress deepening. Vanessa looked around. There wasn't a pharmacy in sight. Without hesitation, she said, "I'll write you a prescription. Find someone swift to take it to the nearest apothecary." A dark cloud fell over the mother's face as she heard this. "Miss, you don't understand. We're forbidden from entering the city. Look at those soldiers, most of their job is to keep watch over us, preventing us from wandering around." Chapter 28, Saving Lives is Paramount. That's outrageous. Vanessa clenched her fists, her frustration mounting. "What do you need?" "I'll send someone." Nicholas Taylor spoke, his face grim. Vanessa knew Nicholas Taylor intended to seek help from the soldiers again. "Fourth brother, why don't you go?" "I'll be fine here." "Don't worry. Don't be absurd," Nicholas Taylor said in a low voice, pulling out some silver. "Tell me what you need. They wouldn't dare to be negligent in a small matter like this if I intervene." Vanessa looked into Nicholas Taylor's eyes, seeing the concern within them. He was right. This place was full of refugees. She, alone and defenseless, truly wasn't safe here. The child's mother anxiously watched Vanessa and Nicholas Taylor, fearing they would abandon her son, yet she dared not ask too much. Her eyes were sharp. Just a glance at their attire and demeanor revealed their wealth and status. Their willingness to help already filled her with immense gratitude. Truth be told, the soiled garment on the young lady was something she wouldn't dare dream of owning in her lifetime. Vanessa finally nodded, stood up, and went under the shelter to quickly write a prescription. Nicholas Taylor took it and handed it to someone nearby, along with a banknote. The man accepted the items with a grin, then quickly mounted his horse, disappearing in a cloud of dust in no time. After several bouts of vomiting, the child's convulsions subsided, though his complexion remained alarmingly pale. With the medicine not yet procured, Vanessa and Nicholas Taylor could only wait. Seeing Vanessa return, the child's mother hurried to offer her a clean rock to sit on. While waiting, Vanessa learned these folks were refugees from the north, many hailing from the Snow Dao Kingdom. Winter comes early in the north, and this year, an abnormally fierce blizzard followed, burying villages and their stored food under heavy snow. To survive, the villagers were forced to migrate south. But fate was cruel. Reaching the border of Snow Dao and Heavenly Qi, they'd barely set up a temporary camp when torrential rains caused floods, leaving them with nothing. With no other choice, they continued south, unexpectedly entering Heavenly Qi territory. Long-standing conflicts between the two nations meant they weren't welcomed. Now, they only wished for these hard times to pass quickly so they could return home. Life in this foreign land was truly a living hell. Seeing their fellow travelers succumb to sickness and starvation, dying prematurely, weighed heavily on their hearts. Winter was approaching, and they were stranded here with no supplies. When the bitter cold arrived, they didn't know how many days they'd survive. It said happiness is relative. Compared to their plight, Vanessa's current life was one of comfort and ease. Watching these people march toward death at an unseen pace, seeing the stone-piled graves nearby, the concepts of love and betrayal seemed insignificant in the face of fragile life. Simply living well, being true, and not wasting life became a profound and precious thing. Lily Taylor had once contemplated death, but seeing life slipping away before her eyes, she felt her own weakness. Those suffering far more than her were striving to appreciate the life they were given. What right did she have, with her small sorrows, to so easily give up her own? The road ahead was bleak, almost pitch black, but they still clung to their last breaths, hoping to see the light after these dark days passed. But she hadn't truly tried, hadn't even considered fighting the darkness, simply surrendering. Vanessa's thoughts were interrupted by another cheer. Someone brought more buckets of hot white porridge to the old tent, thicker this time. Giving Nicholas Taylor face, the soldiers were more polite, no longer resorting to violence. The tent quickly filled, everyone eager for a portion, yet careful not to be greedy. Vanessa turned to Nicholas Taylor. He raised an eyebrow. She didn't see his usual smile, but he seemed more handsome, his presence even larger than life. Nicholas Taylor even personally ladled 2 bowls of porridge for the mother and her 2 children. The mother wiped her hands on her clothes before carefully accepting the bowls, tears welling in her eyes as she repeatedly expressed her gratitude. Observing Nurse's cautious demeanor, Nicholas Taylor's eyebrows furrowed slightly. His reaction was somewhat unexpected to Vanessa. She had assumed he would criticize the squalid environment, keeping a safe distance, but surprisingly, he seemed to adapt with ease and composure. Soon, the medicine was procured, and Nicholas Taylor instructed someone to prepare it on the spot. Vanessa then personally fed it to the child, finally breathing a sigh of relief. The medicine didn't take effect immediately, and seeing that it was getting late, Nicholas Taylor led Vanessa back. Left with no other choice, Vanessa gave detailed instructions to the child's nurse. The child's nurse grasped Vanessa's hand, knelt down, and called her a living bodhisattva, declaring eternal gratitude for her kindness.